Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never told this story outside of my closest friends because I know how it sounds. But after seeing similar accounts on here, I need to get this off my chest. It happened in the summer of 2006 when I visited my uncle's place near Talkeetna, Alaska, with my two buddies, Michael and David. We were all in our early 20s, and we'd been planning this trip for months, a chance to experience the Alaskan wilderness, do some hunting, and just get away from our everyday lives. My uncle knew this elderly landowner who had a massive property out in the middle of nowhere. He said we could hunt there as long as we respected the land. The property was incredible. Hundreds of acres of dense forest with a small pond, a few hills, and a barn where we could crash if we wanted to stay out overnight. The day it all went down started normal enough. We got up early, packed our gear, and headed out to the property around 9 in the morning. It was July, but Alaska still had that crisp morning chill that made you feel alive. The sun was bright, and we were all pumped to spend the day exploring and hopefully bagging something for dinner. We parked near the main house, checked in with the owner, this weathered old guy who'd lived there for decades, and then headed into the woods. Michael brought his shotgun, I had my rifle, and David carried our supplies. We weren't hunting anything specific, just seeing what we might come across. About 2 hours into our hike, I started noticing something weird. The forest had gone completely silent, and I don't mean quiet, I mean dead silent. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling through the underbrush, no insects buzzing, nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. I nudged David and whispered, "You notice that?" He nodded, and I could tell he felt it too. Michael was a few steps ahead, but he turned back with this look on his face that told me he'd picked up on the silence as well. "Maybe there's a predator nearby," Michael suggested, keeping his voice low. "Bear or something." That made sense, so we stayed alert and kept moving, but the silence followed us for hours. No matter where we went on the property, that unnatural quiet persisted. We didn't see a single animal all day, not even tracks or droppings. By late afternoon, we'd covered a good portion of the property without spotting anything worth hunting. As the sun started to set, we decided to make camp near the pond. There was a fire pit there that looked like it had been used before, so we gathered wood and got a decent bonfire going. The flames reflected off the still water of the pond, and for a while, things felt almost normal again. We cooked some of the food we'd brought, cracked a few beers, and tried to shake off the weird vibe from earlier. But as darkness settled in completely, that feeling of wrongness came back stronger than ever. The fire crackled and popped, but beyond its light, the darkness seemed thicker than it should have been. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like we were being watched. Around 11 at night, we heard it. Footsteps. Something was pacing back and forth on the hill about 50 yards behind us. Heavy footsteps that made twigs snap and leaves rustle. Too deliberate to be an animal wandering around. Too heavy to be something small. "You guys hear that?" I whispered, not wanting whatever it was to know we'd noticed. David nodded, his face looking pale in the firelight. Michael grabbed his shotgun and stood up. "I'm gonna check it out," he said, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "Dude, that's a terrible idea," David hissed. "It's pitch black out there." Michael pulled out his flashlight. "It's probably just a moose or something. I'm not going far, just gonna take a look." I didn't like it, but Michael was stubborn. He always had to prove he wasn't scared of anything. "Just be careful, man. Yell if you need us." He nodded, then turned toward the direction of the sounds. The footsteps had stopped, but we all felt like whatever had made them was still there, watching. "Actually," Michael said after a moment, I'm thinking maybe we should head back to the barn for the night. This spot feels too exposed. The barn was about a quarter-mile away, closer to the main house. It seemed like a good idea to me. We quickly packed up our stuff and put out the fire. The property owner had told us we could use the loft in the barn to sleep, and right then, walls around us sounded a lot better than open air. Michael decided to go first with his shotgun. I'll lead the way. You guys follow about 30 seconds behind me. That way, if there is something out there, we won't all run into it at once. I didn't love splitting up, but his logic made a weird kind of sense. He clicked on his flashlight and headed down the trail toward the barn. David and I watched the beam of light get smaller as he moved away. We waited for what felt like forever, but was probably only about a minute. Then we heard it. 6 shotgun blasts in rapid succession. Boom, 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 boom. The shots echoed through the silent forest, and my blood turned to ice. "Michael!" I shouted, all thoughts of staying quiet forgotten. David and I took off running down the trail, our own flashlights bouncing wildly as we sprinted. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. We found Michael about halfway to the barn, standing frozen in the middle of the trail. His shotgun was still raised, the barrel smoking. His eyes were wide, and he was shaking so badly I thought he might collapse. "What happened? Are you okay?" I grabbed his shoulders, trying to get him to focus on me. His skin was ice cold despite the summer night. He wouldn't speak. He just kept staring back into the darkness beside the trail, his flashlight beam jerking around as his hands trembled. David picked up Michael's shotgun, which he'd dropped, and checked that it was empty. "Michael, talk to us, man. What did you see?" David pleaded. It took almost 5 minutes before Michael could form words. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I saw eyes, watching me from just off the trail. They were too far apart to be a bear or a moose, too high up. It was standing there, just staring." A chill ran up my spine. "What do you mean, standing?" "It was tall, taller than me. I could only see the outline, but it was massive. And those eyes, they reflected my flashlight. But they were all wrong, too far apart on its head." "So you shot at it?" David asked, his own voice shaking now. Michael nodded slowly. "It was close, maybe 10 feet away. I emptied the shotgun into it. 6 rounds of buckshot, point-blank range. It should have dropped anything living." "Did you hit it?" I asked. "I had to have hit it. It was right there." Michael's voice cracked, but it just ran off. I heard it crashing through the underbrush after the last shot. It made this sound. Not a growl, not a scream, something in between. We stood there in stunned silence for a moment. Then David grabbed Michael's arm. "We need to get back to the barn. Now." We practically ran the rest of the way, constantly looking over our shoulders and jumping at every sound. The barn was a simple structure, 2 horse stalls below and a hayloft above where we'd planned to sleep. We climbed up to the loft and barricaded the ladder behind us with some old furniture we found up there. None of us slept. We sat in a circle in the middle of the loft, our backs to each other, watching every corner of that dark space. Michael kept his shotgun across his lap, though it was empty now. I had my rifle ready. The silence outside was suffocating. Around 3 in the morning we heard it, a scream that still haunts my nightmares. It started as something almost human, but quickly warped into something else entirely, a high-pitched guttural wail that seemed to go on forever. 20, maybe 30 seconds of this unholy sound, coming from roughly the same area where Michael had fired his shots. It wasn't an animal call I'd ever heard before, not a cougar, not a bear, not a wolf. Nothing natural makes a sound like that. It was like something in agony, but also angry. Furious. The single horse in the stable below us went absolutely crazy when it heard the scream, kicking at its stall and whinnying in panic. I remember thinking that if an animal was that terrified, we should be too. After the scream stopped, the silence returned. complete and absolute. Even the horse eventually quieted down, though I could still hear it breathing heavily and shifting nervously. None of us moved until dawn broke. When the first light filtered through the cracks in the barn walls, we finally felt safe enough to climb down and look around. Michael insisted we check where he'd fired the shots. We moved cautiously back down the trail, jumping at every sound. When we reached the spot, there wasn't much to see at first. No blood trail, no fur, nothing obvious. But after searching carefully, David found what might have been a spot of blood on a leaf. Just a tiny amount, like whatever had been hit had barely bled. Then Michael called us over to something at the edge of the trail, a single deep impression in the soft ground. It was maybe 15 inches long and incredibly deep, like whatever made it had put enormous weight on that one spot. It didn't look like any animal track I'd ever seen. No clear toe marks, no claw marks, just this one strange depression. We got out of there fast after that, packed up our stuff, thanked the property owner without telling him what happened, and drove back to my uncle's place. We ended up leaving Alaska 2 days earlier than planned. I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened that night. Could it have been a bear, a moose, some kind of large predator we just couldn't identify? I've gone over it again and again in my head, but here's the thing I can't explain away. Michael is an excellent shot, and he fired 6 rounds of buckshot at close range into whatever it was. That should have dropped anything known to live in Alaska, anything natural. But this thing took those shots and still had the strength to run away and make that terrible sound hours later. I don't know what we encountered in those woods near Talkeetna, but I know I'll never go back there. And sometimes when I'm alone in the woods at night, I still find myself listening for that unnatural silence that tells me something is very, very wrong. Story 2. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. It's been 17 years, but what happened that morning in Packwood still makes the hair on my neck stand up. I know what I saw. I don't care if people think I'm crazy or making this up for attention. It was November 12th, 2006. I remember the date exactly because it was the second weekend of deer season, and my buddy Dale and I had been planning this trip for months. We'd been hunting that same area near Packwood, Washington for years, a stretch of old logging roads that cut through some prime deer territory. The spot I'm talking about was this overlook on an abandoned logging road that gave you a perfect view of a small clearing between 2 really dense cedar thickets. That morning was cold as hell. Must have been around 30 degrees when I left our camp at around 5:30. Dale was nursing a hangover and said he'd meet me at the spot later. I didn't mind going alone. Been hunting since I was 12, and I know those woods pretty well. I got to my spot well before sunrise, maybe around 6:15. I remember checking my watch and thinking I had plenty of time to get settled before the early morning movement started. The sky was just beginning to lighten, that deep blue-gray before dawn really breaks. There was frost on everything, and my breath made these big clouds in front of my face. I was wearing my usual hunting gear, Carhartt pants, thermal underwear, a couple layers under my camo jacket, orange vest, and my dad's old wool hat. I had my Remington 30-06 with a decent scope, nothing fancy. I'd loaded up with some coffee in my thermos and a couple of those gas station Danishes in my pocket. Normal hunting day, you know? So I settled in at this spot about 20 yards back from the edge of the clearing. There was this fallen log I'd sit on every year, perfect height, and it gave me a clear shot across the whole opening. The clearing itself wasn't huge, maybe 75 yards across, but it was a natural funnel where deer would cross between these 2 thick cedar stands. I'd taken 2 decent bucks from that exact spot over the years. The light came up slow that morning. It was overcast. One of those grey Pacific Northwest days where the clouds hang low and everything feels damp. No wind to speak of, which was good for hunting, but made everything eerily quiet, just the occasional drip of moisture from the trees. By 7:15, I'd already seen a couple of doe move through the far edge of the clearing, but nothing worth taking a shot at. I was sipping my coffee, staying perfectly still when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was a deer moving through the brush on the hillside above and behind me, but it was different, heavier. There was this sound of branches breaking, not the small twigs that snap under a deer's hooves, but substantial branches, and there was a rhythmic quality to it, like something big taking deliberate steps, pausing, then moving again. The sound stopped for maybe 30 seconds, then started again, closer this time. My first thought was bear, obviously. We have plenty of black bears in that area, but bears don't usually move like that. Stop and go, stop and go. They tend to lumber along continuously. The crashing sound happened 3 distinct times, moving down the hillside behind me in stages, getting closer to the clearing each time. By the third movement, it was maybe 50 yards behind me, and I was getting nervous. I'd slowly turn my head to try to see what was making the noise, but the undergrowth was too thick. I remember tightening my grip on my rifle, wondering if I should stand up and turn around completely. But something kept me frozen in place, some instinct telling me to stay absolutely still. Then everything went quiet. Dead quiet, even the normal forest sounds, the birds, the rustling of small animals. It all just stopped. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that's never a good sign. I sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. The silence was crushing. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. My mouth went completely dry. Then I heard movement again, this time at the edge of the cedar thicket to my left, right where it opened into the clearing. Something was about to step out into the open space. I slowly turned my head toward the sound, expecting to see a bear emerge from the trees. But what stepped out? I still struggled to describe it. It was just after 7:30. I remember checking my watch right before it happened. The thing that walked out of those trees was completely black. Not dark brown like a bear, pure, pitch black. And it was walking on 2 legs. Not shuffling or lumbering like a bear might do for a few steps. This was fully bipedal, moving with purpose. It was tall, really tall. I'm 6 feet, and this thing had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet high. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they swung slightly as it walked. The shoulders were massive, impossibly broad, and its head seemed to sit directly on those shoulders without much of a neck. The whole body was covered in what looked like hair or fur, not super long, but enough to give it a shaggy appearance. I couldn't make out any facial features clearly from my distance, just a darker area where the face should be. What really got me was how it moved. This wasn't some guy in a suit. The movement was fluid, powerful, like an athlete, but with this incredible strength evident in every step. It crossed that entire clearing in maybe 5 or 6 seconds. 5 or 6 massive strides, and it was across a space that would take me 20 seconds to jog across. The whole time, I sat there completely frozen. I didn't raise my rifle. I didn't call out. I didn't do anything but stare. It never looked in my direction, never broke its stride. It just walked straight across the clearing and disappeared into the cedar thicket on the other side. After it vanished into the trees, I still couldn't move. My hands were shaking so bad I had to set my coffee thermos down before I dropped it. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Bear walking on hind legs, some kind of prank, but I knew better. No bear moves like that. And nobody in their right mind would be wandering those woods in a costume during deer season when hunters with high-powered rifles are everywhere. I sat there for another 20 minutes, completely rattled. I didn't hear it moving away. Whatever this thing was, it moved silently once it entered the trees on the far side. Eventually, I got up the nerve to stand up, but I didn't follow. No way in hell was I going after it. Around 8:45, I heard Dale coming up the logging road, making his usual amount of noise. He found me still standing there, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. "You look like shit," he said when he saw me. "Miss a shot or something." I tried to tell him what I'd seen, but the words came out all jumbled. I was still in shock, I think. Dale's always been the skeptical type, rolling his eyes at campfire stories, so I was surprised when he suggested we cross the clearing and check for tracks. We walked across together, me scanning the trees the whole time, half expecting that thing to come charging back out. When we got to the spot where I'd seen it cross, Dale pointed at the ground. Well, something definitely came through here. There on the ground was fresh scat. Not like anything I'd seen before. It wasn't bear scat, which I'm familiar with. This was different, larger, with what looked like partially digested grass and berries. And there was something else, long black hairs caught on a broken branch nearby. Here's the thing that really got me. When I'd walked into my hunting spot that morning, I'd crossed that exact same area. That scat hadn't been there at 6:15. Whatever left it had done so during my watch. Dale collected some of the hair, saying he'd check it out, though I don't think he ever did. He tried to convince me I'd seen a bear, a big black bear, walking upright for a few steps. Said the light was tricky at that time of morning, and your mind can play tricks on you, but I know what I saw. That was no bear. We finished our hunt that weekend without another incident. I didn't want to leave. Part of me wanted to see it again, to confirm I wasn't going crazy. But another part was terrified at the thought. I've been back to that spot a few times since then, but never alone. I've never seen anything like it again, but I'm always watching the tree line, always listening for that distinctive sound of heavy branches breaking. I've read about Sasquatch encounters since then. A lot of them describe exactly what I saw. The height, the all-black appearance, the long arms, the fluid movement. Some folks around Packwood have similar stories, though most won't talk about them openly. I don't go around telling people I saw Bigfoot. I don't join those groups that go looking for them. I just know what I saw that morning, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but was as real as the trees and the dirt and the cold air. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking about those few seconds when it crossed the clearing, about how small I felt, about how that thing could have easily changed direction and come toward me, and there wouldn't have been a damn thing I could have done about it. I still hunt, still spend time in those woods, but I'm different now. More alert, more aware that we don't know everything about the world around us, that there are things in those ancient forests that we can't explain. I've never gone public with this until now. My wife thinks I saw a bear. Dale suggests maybe I dozed off and dreamed it. But I know the difference between dreams and reality. And what I saw crossing that clearing on that cold November morning was very, very real. To this day, I can close my eyes and see it perfectly. That massive black figure moving with impossible grace across the frost-covered clearing, disappearing into the cedars like a ghost. And I still don't have a rational explanation for what I witnessed. Story 3. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened to me and my girlfriend back in the summer of 2007. It's been 16 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. The sounds, the fear, all of it is burned into my memory. I had just graduated high school that spring and was dating this girl, Amber, who I'd met during senior year. We'd only been together about 3 months, but things were going great. We both loved the outdoors, so I suggested we go camping at Spicer Reservoir. It's up in the Sierras, this beautiful spot off Highway 4. I'd been there a few times with my dad when I was younger, but I knew about this special spot that was more secluded. Instead of staying at the main campground, I wanted to impress Amber with my wilderness knowledge. So we turned off onto this old logging road that crosses a bridge over the Stanislaus River. The road was rough. My old Subaru bounced and scraped the whole way, but I was trying to play it cool, like I knew exactly what I was doing. We parked at this small clearing, grabbed our gear, and hiked downstream about a mile. It was a perfect spot right beside the river, flat ground for the tent, trees for shade, and nobody else around. The water was so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom. We set up camp and spent the afternoon fishing and swimming. I caught a small trout, but we released it. We hadn't brought proper cooking gear anyway. We had sandwiches and snacks for food. The whole day was perfect. The sun was warm but not too hot. There was a light breeze, and being alone with Amber in such a beautiful place Felt like exactly where I was supposed to be after graduation. We had plans to go to the same community college in the fall, and everything felt right with the world. As the sun started to set, we were sitting by the edge of the river on these flat rocks, just talking and enjoying the moment. Amber suddenly stopped mid-sentence and pointed upstream. "Hey, look, someone's crossing the river up there." I squinted against the setting sun. About 200 yards upstream, I could make out what looked like a figure moving through the water. It was hard to see clearly with the sun in my eyes, but it looked big, like someone wearing bulky clothes or maybe carrying a backpack. I just assumed it was another hiker or fisherman. "Probably just someone fishing," I said. "They'll probably come say hi." But no one ever appeared. After about 20 minutes, I kind of forgot about it. We made a small fire. I know, probably not allowed, but it was a small one. Roasted some marshmallows and eventually crawled into the tent around 10. I don't know why, but I had trouble sleeping that night. Maybe it was the unfamiliar sounds of the river, or the ground was harder than I expected. Around 6 in the morning, I suggested to Amber that we might be more comfortable somewhere else. I remembered another spot a few miles back, down the logging road, that had softer ground. So we packed up and drove to this other place I knew about. It was a small, open patch about 20 yards from the river, surrounded by pine trees. More secluded, more private. We set up camp again, spent the day exploring, swimming in a deeper part of the river, and generally just enjoying ourselves. Everything was fine until evening rolled around. We had just finished eating some granola bars and jerky for dinner and were getting ready for bed. It was around 9, I think, when we first heard it, this high-pitched scream echoing from upstream. At first I thought it might be an owl or something, but it was too loud, too human-like, but also not human at all. It's hard to describe, like a woman screaming but deeper and more guttural at the same time. "What was that?" Amber whispered, grabbing my arm. "Probably just some animal," I said, trying to sound confident. "Maybe coyotes or something." But the screams continued. They'd start far off, then sound closer, then far again, like whatever was making them was moving back and forth along the river. I tried to tell Amber it was probably stray dogs, or maybe even cattle from a ranch somewhere nearby, but I didn't believe it myself. Those screams, they weren't like anything I'd ever heard before. This went on for about half an hour and then suddenly stopped. The silence afterward was almost worse than the screaming. We sat there in the dark, just listening to the river and the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. "I think we should go," Amber whispered. "It's fine," I said, though my heart was racing. Whatever it was is gone now. And it's too dark to pack up and drive on that road. I convinced her to stay, but neither of us could sleep. Around 11, I noticed clouds moving in, and the air had that heavy feeling like it might rain. I told Amber I was going to secure our gear and make sure the tent was properly staked down. I stepped outside with my flashlight and started moving our backpacks under the rainfly. The night was weirdly still now. Even the usual cricket sounds had stopped. As I was adjusting the stakes on the tent, I heard it. Heavy footsteps on the dry stones of the creek bed behind our tent. Slow, deliberate steps, much heavier than a human's. I froze, my flashlight beam fixed on the ground in front of me. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. The footsteps continued, moving along the bank of the river. Finally, I gathered my courage and swung the flashlight toward the sound. I caught just a glimpse of something, a broad, dark shape passing behind our tent. It was tall, way taller than me, and I'm 6 foot. It paused at the edge of a pine tree about 30 feet away. I couldn't see it clearly, just this massive silhouette that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam rather than reflect it. My hand was shaking so bad, the light was bouncing everywhere. I called out, "Hello?" My voice cracked like I was 13 again. No response, just this presence, standing there, watching. Suddenly, there was a crash and splash from the river. That same scream from earlier tore through the night, but it was so much closer now, maybe only 50 yards away. I swung my flashlight toward the sound and saw the water churning. Whatever made the sound was stomping into the river, thrashing at the shallows. Between screams, it was making this low, growling sound that I felt more than heard, like it vibrated inside my chest. I dove back into the tent, zipping it closed as if a thin layer of nylon would protect us. Amber was sitting up, eyes wide with terror. "What is it? What's out there?" she whispered. Before I could answer, we heard heavy, wet footsteps coming straight back up the bank. They stopped right outside our tent, right outside our tent. I could hear breathing, deep, heavy breaths. Amber was silently crying next to me, and I was too terrified to move. Then it let out this bark, not like a dog, but this explosive, powerful sound that seemed to shake the whole tent. And then it pounded off into the brush. We could hear branches breaking and undergrowth being crushed as it moved away. We sat there in complete silence for I don't know how long, hours, maybe. Neither of us slept a wink. I kept the flashlight on all night, though I doubted it would do any good if that thing came back. At the first hint of light around 5 in the morning, we packed up without even making breakfast. We didn't talk, just threw everything into our backpacks as quickly as possible and practically ran back to the car. The whole way, I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that thing was watching us from the trees. It wasn't until we were driving, putting miles between us and that place, that Amber spoke. That person I saw crossing the river yesterday, that wasn't a person, was it? And that's when it hit me, what she'd seen the day before, what she'd described as someone in dark, heavy clothing crossing the river. That had been the same creature. It had been watching us the whole time. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. What did we see? What did we hear? I've read about mountain lions, bears, all the wildlife in that area. Nothing matches. The size, the screams, the way it moved. The only thing that comes close in my mind is what people describe when they talk about Bigfoot. I never reported it. Who would I even tell? The park ranger would think I was some kid making up stories. But I know what I experienced. I know what I heard. And I've never camped in that canyon again, 16 years later, and I still wake up sometimes, hearing that scream in my dreams. Amber and I broke up a few months later. We never really talked about what happened that night, but I think it changed something between us. How do you go back to normal after something like that? I still love camping and hiking, but I stick to popular crowded campgrounds now, and I always make sure I'm back at my tent before dark, because whatever was out there on the Stanislaus River that night, whatever was watching us and screaming into the darkness, I don't ever want to meet it again. Story 4. I still can't explain what happened that day in the woods. I've spent my whole career in law enforcement, with years in the U.S. Forest Service before that. I know the Pennsylvania woods better than my own backyard. I've tracked animals, people, and everything in between. But what I encountered while deer hunting last year still keeps me up some nights. It was November 30th, 2009, opening day of rifle season. I'd scouted a promising spot on state game lands north of Glendale Lake in Cambria County a few days before. Found some good buck sign, scrapes, rubs, the works. I was excited to get out there. The weather was absolute garbage that morning. Rainy, cold, dark as pitch. I woke up at 3:30, made some coffee, grabbed my gear, and headed out. I wanted to be in position well before first light. I got to my parking spot around 5:15 in the morning. No other vehicles around. Exactly what I was hoping for. This spot was off the beaten path, about a mile hike in from the access road. I clicked on my headlamp and started the trek to my stand. The rain had soaked everything. Each footstep made that distinct squishing sound on the wet leaves. My boots were covered in mud within minutes. The forest was eerily quiet, except for the constant dripping of water from the trees. About halfway to my stand, something caught my attention. A smell. Not the typical forest smells I'm used to, not the earthy scent of wet leaves or the sharp tang of pine. This was different, musky, animal-like, but not deer or bear. It was strong enough that I noticed it immediately, even with my nose half frozen. What struck me was that I'd caught the same scent the day before when I was checking my trail camera and scouting the area. I remember thinking it was odd then, but didn't give it much thought. Probably just a dead animal somewhere nearby, I figured. I reached my stand around 5:40. It was a simple ladder stand I'd set up against a mature oak on the edge of a small clearing. Perfect sight lines in 3 directions. I climbed up, secured my safety harness, and settled in. The rain had tapered off to a light drizzle. Legal shooting light wouldn't start for another hour or so. I just sat there in the darkness, listening, letting my eyes adjust. That smell was still there, stronger now, almost pungent. It reminded me of wet dog mixed with something else I couldn't place. Skunk cabbage maybe, but not quite. I've smelled bear, deer, coyote, fox, you name it. This wasn't any of those. About 20 minutes after I got settled, I started hearing movement. It was coming from about 50 yards ahead of me, beyond the clearing in the thicker woods. At first, I thought deer. That's what I was there for, after all. But something wasn't right. The footfalls were all wrong, too heavy, too deliberate. When deer move through the forest, even a big buck, there's a certain rhythm to it. This was different. Whatever was moving out there had considerable weight. I could hear branches cracking, wood snapping under each step. I've tracked black bears for years. I know their movements, their patterns. This wasn't a bear either. Bears have a shuffling gait. This was bipedal, 2 feet, not 4. The steps were spaced out like a person walking, but much heavier, much more powerful. Then came the sounds. I'll never forget them as long as I live. 2 distinct whoops, spaced maybe 5 seconds apart. Not a howl, not a scream, not any kind of owl call I've ever heard. It was a high-pitched whoop sound, loud enough to carry through the forest, but not prolonged. It reminded me a little of the way chimps vocalize at the zoo, but deeper, more resonant. The hair on the back of my neck stood up instantly. After those vocalizations, the footsteps slowly moved away, deeper into the forest. I sat there frozen, straining my eyes to see through the darkness, but it was just too dark. All I had was my hearing and that persistent smell. That musky odor hung around for nearly 2 hours before gradually dissipating as dawn approached. When daylight finally came, I noticed something strange. There were no deer, none. This area was usually active with deer, especially during the rut. I'd seen plenty of sign. But that morning, nothing. It was like they'd all cleared out. Even the squirrels and birds seemed scarce. I stayed in my stand until about 11 that morning. Not a single deer showed up. Eventually, I decided to check the area where I'd heard the movement and vocalizations. The ground was saturated from the rain, but I could see where something large had moved through. Broken branches about 7 to 8 feet up on some trees. Some smaller saplings pushed aside, but the rain had washed away any clear tracks in the mud. I found one partial impression that might have been a footprint, about 15 inches long, but it was too distorted by the rain to be sure. I've spent 20+ years in these woods. I've encountered pretty much every animal native to Pennsylvania. I know what bears sound like, what they smell like. Same with coyotes, bobcats, everything. Whatever I encountered that morning wasn't any of those. It was huge, it was heavy, it moved on 2 legs, and it made vocalizations I've never heard from any known animal in this region. I'm not one to jump to conclusions. I'm trained to look at evidence, to be objective, but I'm also trained to trust my instincts, and everything about that encounter set off alarm bells. The smell, the footfalls, those whoop sounds. They all match descriptions I've read of Sasquatch encounters. I've always been skeptical about Bigfoot. Still am, to be honest. Without hard evidence, I can't say for certain what was out there, but I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a deer, it wasn't a person. No human could make those sounds or move with that kind of weight, and no one in their right mind would be wandering around in those woods, in the rain, hours before dawn on the opening day of rifle season. I went back to that same spot a week later. Nothing. No unusual smells, no strange sounds. It was just woods again. Saw a few deer, even took a small doe for the freezer. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched the whole time. I've told a few close friends about this. Fellow officers who wouldn't immediately think I'm crazy. Most of them just nod and change the subject. One suggested I'd encountered a moose that had wandered down from New York. But moose don't make those sounds, and they're extremely rare this far south. The thing that bothers me most is that I can't explain it. In my line of work, there's usually an explanation for everything. Evidence points to conclusions. But this, I've got nothing concrete. Just what I heard, what I smelled, and the absence of any other wildlife that morning. I still hunt those woods, still do my job. But I'm more alert now, more aware of my surroundings. I carry a voice recorder with me when I'm in the field, and I find myself looking over my shoulder more often, especially when I'm alone in the forest before dawn or after dusk. Whatever was out there that rainy November morning, it knew I was there. Those vocalizations weren't random, they were directed, communicative. That's what unnerves me the most. It wasn't just an animal moving through the woods. It was aware, intelligent. The rational part of my brain still looks for logical explanations. Maybe it was some combination of known animals and acoustics in the wet forest playing tricks on me. Maybe the smell was just some unusual fungus or plant I've never encountered before. Maybe those whoops were just a bird or mammal making a call I'm not familiar with. But deep down, I know better. 20 years in these woods, and I've never experienced anything like that before or since. I'm left with more questions than answers. What was it? Why was it there? Where did it go? Is it still out there? I don't know if I'll ever find those answers. Part of me doesn't want to, but another part of me can't help but scan the tree line whenever I'm in those woods now, listening for heavy footsteps and those distinctive whoops. I've heard other officers and rangers mention unusual experiences over the years, strange sounds, unexplained tracks, feelings of being watched. Most of us brush it off, joke about it. It's easier that way, easier than admitting there might be something out there we can't explain. Something that challenges everything we think we know about the wildlife in these forests. That morning changed me, not in any dramatic way that others would notice, but inside, I know the world is stranger than I thought. There are things in these woods that don't fit neatly into scientific classifications, things that move through the shadows, watching us while remaining unseen. I'll be back in those same woods this November, same stand, same routine. Part of me hopes for another encounter, something I could document, record, prove. But a bigger part of me hopes that whatever was out there that rainy morning stays deep in the forest, away from human contact. Because some mysteries might be better left unsolved. Story 5. I've debated for months whether to post this. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone, but I need to get this off my chest. What I saw last October still keeps me up at night sometimes, and honestly, writing it down might help me process it. For context, I live in a fairly remote cabin in western Pennsylvania, about 30 minutes from the nearest proper town. I've been here for almost 7 years now. I'm not some city slicker who moved to the woods and gets spooked by every raccoon or coyote. I grew up hunting with my dad. I know what bears look like at different distances. I can identify most animal tracks, and I'm generally comfortable with wildlife. This happened on a Thursday night in mid-October. My buddy Mike had gone on a business trip and asked if I could watch his dog, Cooper, for the weekend. Cooper's a big German Shepherd mix, super smart and well-trained. I've watched him plenty of times before without any issues. It was around 11:30 at night, and I was just about to go to bed when Cooper started pacing near the back door. I figured he needed to go out one last time. The night was clear but cold, probably in the low 40s, with a near full moon. I didn't bother with a jacket since I was just going to stand on the porch while Cooper did his business. My property backs up against a dense stretch of forest. I've got about half an acre of cleared land behind the cabin, and then there's a simple wire fence marking the boundary before the woods start. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep larger critters from wandering right up to the house. Cooper hopped down the porch steps and trotted out into the yard, sniffing around. I was leaning against the porch railing, half asleep, when Cooper suddenly froze. His ears went straight up, and he turned toward the tree line, completely rigid. Then he let out this low, rumbling growl, not his normal bark at squirrels or the neighbor's cat. This was different, more primal. That woke me up fast. I've never heard Cooper make that sound before. I called to him, but he ignored me completely, still locked onto something near the back fence. I went inside quickly and grabbed my spotlight, one of those high-powered LED ones that can light up half a football field. When I came back out, Cooper had moved closer to the fence, still growling, hackles raised. I swept the light across the tree line, not really expecting to see anything. That's when I saw it. About 15 yards beyond the fence, something huge was moving between the trees. At first, all I caught was movement, a light brown mass shifting between two large oaks. I adjusted the beam, and for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, I got a clear look at something I still can't fully explain. It was tall, really tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over what my brain registered as normal, 8 feet at minimum, maybe taller. It was covered in light brown or dirty blonde hair, not fur like a bear, but longer hair that moved slightly in the breeze. The build was massive across the shoulders, but the proportions were all wrong for a bear. It was standing upright, completely vertical, with arms that hung much lower than a human's would. I couldn't make out facial features clearly from that distance, but I could tell it had turned its head to look directly at me in the spotlight. The eyes reflected the light, 2 yellowish-green dots in the darkness. What hit me hardest wasn't just seeing this thing, but the overwhelming feeling of wrongness that came with it. Like my brain was screaming that what I was seeing shouldn't exist. I felt my skin go cold, and it wasn't from the night air. The creature didn't run away immediately. It stood there looking at me for what was probably only a few seconds, but felt like minutes. Then it simply turned and moved deeper into the woods, not sprinting, but taking these massive strides that covered ground incredibly quickly. The way it moved was fluid and deliberate, nothing like a bear's lumbering gait. Cooper went absolutely berserk. He ran to the fence and started barking frantically, which he never does. He's trained not to bark unless there's a real threat. I called him back, and he actually hesitated before returning to me, still growling and looking back at the woods. As the creature moved away, I heard other dogs start barking in the distance. My nearest neighbor is about a quarter-mile down the road, and I could hear their 2 labs going crazy. Whatever this thing was, it was moving in that direction, and other animals were noticing. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, scanning the woods with my spotlight, but saw nothing else. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the light steady. Cooper wouldn't leave my side and kept making this weird whining sound I'd never heard from him before. When we finally went back inside, I locked every door and window, something I rarely do out here. I tried calling my brother, but it was late and he didn't pick up. I ended up texting my sister and my cousin, basically saying, "I think I just saw a Bigfoot behind my house." Big mistake. My sister immediately called and asked if I'd been drinking. But then I remembered the eyes reflecting in my spotlight, the impossible height, and that feeling of absolute wrongness that washed over me. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I wouldn't believe it either if someone told me this story. But I know what I saw, and nothing, not ridicule, not rational explanations, not time, has changed that certainty. The woods behind my cabin feel different to me now. I still go out there, still hike the same trails I always have, but something has changed. I find myself looking over my shoulder more, listening harder to the sounds around me. And on quiet nights when the wind is still, I sometimes think I hear heavy footsteps moving through the distant trees. I don't have answers. I don't have proof. All I have is what I saw and the absolute certainty that something unexplainable shares these woods with me. Something that, by any conventional understanding of our world, shouldn't exist. But it does. I saw it, and no amount of skepticism from others will ever erase those few seconds when my spotlight illuminated something impossible moving through the trees behind my home. Story 6. I still can't believe it's been over 25 years since it happened. Winter of '95. I was 17, a junior in high school, and my brother Michael was 19. We never really talked about it much outside our immediate circle because, well, who would believe us? But I swear on everything I hold dear, what we saw that night in the woods outside Thompsonville was real. It was early January, bitterly cold even by Michigan standards. We'd gotten a few inches of snow earlier that week, and everything was still covered in white. I'd gone to Jason Mueller's party that night. Nothing crazy, just some kids hanging out playing video games, listening to music. I wasn't drinking since I was driving, but it was fun. My parents let me use the family van that night, a blue Dodge Caravan that had seen better days, but it was reliable enough. Around 11:30, I offered to drive Lisa Connors home. She lived about 4 miles outside of town on one of those rural roads that doesn't see much traffic. Michael had tagged along to the party. He was home from community college for winter break, so he was with me after we dropped Lisa off. The temperature gauge in the van read -12 degrees. The heater was struggling to keep up, and I remember Michael kept rubbing his hands together and complaining about the cold. We were heading east on Thompson Creek Road, which cuts through this dense patch of forest for about 3 miles before connecting to the main highway. There were no streetlights out there, nothing but our headlights cutting through the darkness. The moon was bright that night, though, casting this eerie blue glow on the snow. Everything was still, that special kind of quiet you only get in winter when snow dampens all sound. We'd been driving for maybe 5 minutes after dropping Lisa off, talking about nothing important, some movie we wanted to see, I think, when it happened. I'll never forget it. Never. About 30 yards ahead of us, something stepped out from the tree line on the left side of the road. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer, but immediately I knew that wasn't right. Deer don't walk like that. This thing was upright, walking on 2 legs. I instinctively slowed down, not dramatically, just eased off the gas. The van's headlights caught the figure as it moved across the road at a steady pace, not running, not in a hurry, just walking purposefully, like it had somewhere to be, and it was white, not dirty white, or greyish like an old polar bear at the zoo. This was pure bright white, like fresh snow. It had thick fur covering its entire body. I remember thinking it looked almost luminous in the headlights. The creature crossed the road completely and disappeared into the woods on the right side, the whole encounter lasting maybe 7 or 8 seconds. But those seconds are burned into my memory forever. Neither of us said a word. I kept driving, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't want to be the first to speak because I was half convinced I'd imagined it. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe it was a trick of the light or the shadows playing on the snow. We drove in complete silence for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple of minutes. Finally, Michael turned to me and said, "What the hell was that?" His voice was barely above a whisper, like he was afraid something might hear us. I remember the flood of relief I felt. He'd seen it too. I wasn't going crazy. "I don't know," I said. I was afraid to say anything because I thought I might be seeing things. "How tall do you think it was?" Michael asked. I thought about it. 6 feet, maybe? Hard to tell from the distance, but definitely bigger than a person, and bulkier. Michael nodded. It walked so confidently, like it didn't care that we saw it. He was right. There was no hesitation in its movements, no startled reaction to our headlights. It just crossed the road like it had done it 1,000 times before. I've been hunting and fishing in Michigan my whole life. By 17, I'd spent more time in the woods than most adults. I know what bears look like, what wolves look like, what every native animal to the area looks like. This wasn't any of those. The white fur is what throws most people off when we tell the story. Everyone knows Bigfoot is supposed to be brown or black, right? That's what all the stories say. But this thing was white as snow, which made it even more unsettling somehow. Like it had adapted to the Michigan winters, evolved to blend in with its surroundings. We talked about turning around to look for tracks, but neither of us had the courage. The thought of getting out of the van in those dark woods, knowing that thing was out there, no way, we just wanted to get home. When we got back to our house, we stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about it in hushed voices in the kitchen. We didn't want to wake our parents. What would we even tell them? That we saw some kind of white Bigfoot crossing Thompson Creek Road? They'd think we were making it up, or that someone had slipped something into our drinks at the party. The next day, Michael and I drove back to the spot in daylight. There had been a light dusting of snow overnight, and we couldn't find any definitive tracks, just some vague depressions in the snow that could have been anything. The rational part of my brain tried to convince me that what we'd seen was just a person in a white coat, maybe a hunter. But hunters don't go out at midnight in negative 12-degree weather, and no human I know moves quite like that thing moved. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white figure crossing the road. I kept wondering, what if it had decided to approach our van? What if it had some kind of territorial instinct we triggered? What if it had followed us home? I became obsessed with researching local legends, looking for any mention of a white creature in the forests around Thompsonville. I found nothing specific to our area, though there were some Native American legends about spirit creatures from further north that sort of fit the description. The Wendigo myths came closest, but those are typically described as emaciated, and what we saw was definitely robust and strong-looking. One detail that still haunts me is that we never clearly saw its face. It was mostly in profile from our angle, and the fur seemed to obscure its features. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Sometimes I think seeing its face might have given me some closure, some way to categorize what we'd encountered. Other times, I'm grateful we didn't see whatever expression it might have been wearing. I tried telling a couple of close friends about it. Most of them laughed it off, or suggested we'd seen a bear walking weird or something. One friend, Jake, seemed genuinely interested and told me his uncle had seen something similar near Grayling back in the 70s. Though he described it as more brownish-grey. I latched onto that story like a lifeline, proof that we weren't alone in our experience. Michael and I made a pact to go camping that summer near where we had the sighting. We thought maybe we could find evidence, broken branches, unusual tracks, anything. But when June rolled around, I chickened out. The thought of being in a tent vulnerable in the same woods as that thing, I just couldn't do it. Michael was relieved, I think. He'd been putting on a brave face, but he was just as scared as I was. What bothers me most about the whole thing is the purposefulness of it all. This wasn't a random animal crossing a road. There was intelligence in its movement, a deliberateness that suggested it knew exactly where it was going and why, like it had business on the other side of those trees. What kind of business does a 6-foot-tall white creature have in the woods of northern Michigan in the dead of winter? Over the years, I've gone back and forth between wanting to know more and wanting to forget it ever happened. Michael moved to Chicago after college, and whenever we get together over holidays, we might exchange a look if the conversation drifts to weird experiences or the supernatural. But we rarely discuss it anymore. It's like this shared secret that's both connecting and isolating. I still live in Michigan, though not in Thompsonville anymore. I moved about an hour away for work after college. I still hunt and fish, still spend time in the woods, but I never go alone, and I never stay after dark. Not anymore. Sometimes when I'm driving on rural roads at night, especially in winter, I catch myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that white figure step out again. My heart races every time headlights illuminate something moving in the distance, only to find it's just a deer or the wind blowing snow from tree branches. A few years ago, I heard about a couple of hikers who went missing for 3 days in the Manistee National Forest, not far from Thompsonville. When they were found, they were disoriented and suffering from exposure, but physically unharmed. They claimed they had been followed by something they couldn't clearly see, just glimpses of movement in their peripheral vision. They described feeling like they were being herded away from trails and deeper into the forest. The official report blamed hypothermia-induced confusion, but I wonder. I don't know what we saw that night. I've considered all the logical explanations. A person in winter gear, an unusually colored bear walking oddly, some kind of mass hallucination between my brother and me. None of them fit. None of them explain the cold certainty I felt in that moment that we were witnessing something not meant to be seen by human eyes. 25 years later, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. That thing is probably still out there, walking those same woods, crossing that same road on cold winter nights when it thinks no one is watching. Sometimes I wonder if it remembers us, the two brothers in the blue van who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe for it, we were just another passing curiosity in a world it understands far better than we ever will. Story 7. It was around midnight when we finally headed home. My sisters were all tired. The youngest two, Beth and Katie, who were 6 and 8, were practically falling asleep in the back seat. My 15-year-old sister Jenna was riding shotgun, playing with the radio and complaining about how dark it was out there, and it was dark, really dark. We were on one of those back roads that wind through the pine forests around Lake Marian. There weren't many houses out there, just trees pressing in on both sides of the narrow road and the occasional gravel driveway disappearing into the darkness. The headlights of our old Chevy were the only light around, cutting a tunnel through the pitch black. The moon was hidden behind clouds that night, which made everything feel even more isolated. I was driving carefully because I knew these roads could be dangerous at night. Deer would sometimes jump out, and I didn't want to wreck Mom's car. She'd trusted me with it, and with my sisters, and I took that seriously. We were about 15 minutes from home when Jenna suddenly sat up straight and pointed. "What's that? Is that someone walking?" I slowed down a bit, squinting through the windshield. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on us, but then I saw it too. A dark figure walking along the gravel edge of the road ahead of us. My first thought was that it was weird for someone to be out walking at midnight on such a remote road. Probably just some drunk guy, I said, trying to sound casual, though something felt off. I'll give him plenty of space. But as we got closer, I realized something wasn't right. The headlights were illuminating more details, and what I was seeing wasn't making sense. This wasn't a person wearing dark clothes like I'd first thought. The figure wasn't wearing any clothes at all. Instead, it was covered in what looked like dark fur or hair, from its massive shoulders all the way down. And when I say massive shoulders, I mean massive. This thing was tall, impossibly tall. As we approached, I realized with a sickening feeling that its shoulders actually rose above the top edge of our car's windshield. "What is that?" Jenna whispered, her voice suddenly tight with fear. Before I could answer, the thing turned to look at us, and that's when everything inside me went cold. Its eyes, God, its eyes, they were yellow and seemed to glow like burning coals in the darkness. They reflected our headlights, but also seemed to have their own inner light, burning beneath a heavy brow ridge, and they were staring directly at us, directly into the windshield, directly at me. Beth and Katie both started screaming in the back seat. Their screams sounded distant somehow, like they were coming from the end of a long tunnel, because all I could focus on was this thing standing by the road, its eyes locked with mine. "Go faster! Go faster!" Jenna was hitting my arm now, her voice high with panic. but I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. It was like time had slowed down, and all I could see were those eyes and the massive shape of this creature. It wasn't moving away from the road like a normal animal would when confronted with headlights. It was standing its ground, its massive shoulders shifting slightly as if it was turning to face us more directly. Its arms hung long at its sides, too long for a human. I could see the hair on its body rippling slightly in the breeze, catching the light from our headlights. The hair looked coarse and thick, darker than the surrounding night. What struck me most was its head. It sat low into those enormous shoulders, with hardly any neck visible. It didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen before, and it certainly didn't look human, despite standing on two legs. Then it took one deliberate step closer to the road, just one step, but it was enough to show me the width of its fur-covered thighs, like tree trunks, and to snap me out of my frozen state. That one step was purposeful, almost threatening. "Drive!" Jenna screamed, and the little ones were crying now, Katie repeating, "I want Mom! I want Mom!" over and over. I finally managed to press the gas pedal, and our car lurched forward. As we accelerated past the creature, it pivoted its upper body to watch us leave, not turning with its feet like a person would, but twisting at the waist, those eyes still reflecting in our taillights as we sped away. I drove way too fast down that dark road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. No one spoke. The only sounds were Beth and Katie sniffling in the back seat and Jenna's rapid breathing beside me. When we finally pulled onto the main highway, Jenna whispered, "What was that thing?" I didn't answer because I didn't want to say what I was thinking. I didn't want to put it into words and make it real. But I knew what I'd seen. We all did. We drove home in shocked silence. When we got there, Mom was waiting up, angry that we were so late. She started to lecture us, but then she saw our faces and stopped mid-sentence. "What happened?" she asked, suddenly worried. I couldn't tell her. What would I say? That we saw a monster in the woods? That we saw a creature that shouldn't exist? So I just mumbled something about a deer that almost ran in front of the car and how it had scared us. She didn't believe me. I could tell, but she didn't push it. That night, none of my sisters would sleep alone. Beth and Katie crawled into my bed, and even Jenna, who usually acted too cool for such things, dragged her blanket in and slept on my floor. None of us slept much. The next morning we tried to act normal, but something had changed. We were jumpy, startled by shadows. I kept seeing those yellow eyes every time I closed my own. We never fully explained to Mom what happened that night. How could we? But over the years, the four of us have occasionally talked about it among ourselves, usually late at night when we're all home for holidays. Each time, we all remember the same details. Those burning yellow eyes, those massive shoulders, the way it deliberately turned to watch us leave. I've done research since then, trying to find explanations for what we saw. I've read about bears standing on their hind legs, about optical illusions caused by headlights and tired eyes, about local legends and tall tales, but nothing fits what we saw that night. I'm 29 now, with a family of my own, but I still won't drive that road at night. I still have dreams about those eyes watching me, about that deliberate step toward our car. Sometimes I wake up sweating, convinced that the creature is standing outside my window, waiting. My youngest sister Katie drew a picture of it for a school project once, a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes. Her teacher called our mom, concerned about disturbing imagery. Mom just said Katie had an active imagination, but it wasn't imagination. I know what I saw that night by Lake Marian. I saw something that shouldn't exist, something that walked on two legs but wasn't human. Something with burning yellow eyes and shoulders that rose above my windshield. Something that watched us with intelligence and purpose. I've heard people talk about Bigfoot sightings before, and I used to laugh it off like everyone else. Not anymore. Not since that October night in 2006 when four sisters drove home in terrified silence, all seeing the same impossible thing. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and I see movement at the edge of the woods, my heart stops for a second. I hold my breath until I'm sure it's just a deer or a shadow, because deep down, I know they're out there. At least one of them is. And I never ever want to see those yellow eyes again. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Most days, I try not to believe it myself. But then night falls, and I remember the width of those thighs, the height of those shoulders, and those eyes. Those terrible yellow eyes that still watch me in my dreams. Story 8. I still haven't told many people about what happened that night in the hills outside Ukaya. Most wouldn't believe me anyway. My parents think I'm making it up, and even my friends who were there that night still laugh it off. But I know what I saw, and Jake knows too. It was late April in 2020, right when COVID was ramping up, but before everything completely shut down. School had gone remote, and there wasn't much to do except hang out in small groups. We were all going stir-crazy. I was a senior in high school, just a few weeks from graduation, though we already knew the ceremony would be virtual. Me, Jake, Melissa, Tyler, and Amber decided to drive out to this spot in the hills, where supposedly there used to be this old sanitarium from like the 1920s or something. Tyler had found it on some urbex website and was convinced we'd find cool artifacts, or at least get some creepy photos for Instagram. We were bored enough that it sounded like a great idea. We took 2 cars, since we couldn't all fit in one with social distancing. I drove my dad's Subaru with Jake, while Tyler drove the others in his mom's minivan. The drive took about 40 minutes from town, mostly on these winding back roads. The last turn was onto this narrow dirt road that honestly looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. We drove maybe half a mile down it before it got too rough, so we just pulled over on the side. I remember checking my phone as we parked. It was around 9:30 at night. No service, of course. The moment I stepped out of the car, I was struck by how completely dark it was. I mean, I've been camping before, but this was different. There were no distant lights from houses or streets, just pure darkness except for the moon, which was nearly full but kept going behind clouds. We all clicked on our flashlights. I had a good one, this heavy mag light my dad gave me for camping. Jake had a decent headlamp, and the others had their phone lights. Tyler pulled up the coordinates on his offline map, saying the ruins should be about a quarter mile into the woods, up a hill. Dude, are we seriously doing this? Melissa asked, hugging herself. This feels like the start of every horror movie ever. Don't be such a baby, Tyler said, already heading toward the tree line. It's just some old buildings, probably nothing left but foundations anyway. I remember the air was cool and damp. It had rained earlier that day, and everything smelled like wet earth and pine. Our shoes made squelching sounds in the mud as we started walking. I was actually kind of excited. Not scared at all yet, just that usual thrill of doing something a little forbidden. We had just gotten to the edge of the woods when Jake tapped my shoulder. "Hey, shine your light up there," he whispered, pointing up the slope to our right. I aimed my maglite where he was pointing, about 40 feet up a steep hillside. At first I didn't see anything, just brush, some scrubby trees and shadows. Then something moved. I can't really explain the feeling that went through me. It was like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. From behind a cluster of brush, this figure stepped out. It was big, way bigger than a person. Tall and broad, walking upright on 2 legs, but covered entirely in what looked like dark brown hair or fur. The beam of my flashlight caught it in profile as it moved sideways across the hillside. Its arms were long, like unnaturally long, swinging low near its knees. The head sat directly on these massive shoulders without much of a neck that I could see. It wasn't looking at us. It just moved steadily and deliberately across about 30 feet of relatively open ground before turning uphill and disappearing behind more brush and trees. The whole sighting probably lasted maybe 15 seconds, but it felt like time slowed down. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Jake and I just stood there, flashlights fixed on the spot where it vanished, waiting to see if it would reappear. It didn't. Did you? Jake's voice cracked, and he had to start again. "Did you see that?" I nodded, still unable to form words. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Was that what I think it was?" he whispered. "I don't know," I finally managed to say. "I don't know what that was." The others had stopped a few yards ahead of us, turning back when they realized we weren't following. "What are you guys doing?" Tyler called back. "Come on!" Jake and I exchanged a look. I don't know why, but we silently agreed not to tell the others right then. Maybe we didn't want to freak them out, or maybe we were worried they'd want to leave immediately. Or honestly, maybe we thought they'd laugh at us. Either way, we jogged to catch up with them. "Thought I saw something, but it was just a shadow," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. As we continued hiking toward the supposed sanitarium site, I kept looking back over my shoulder, sweeping my flashlight across the woods. Every tree looked like it could be hiding something. Every rustling sound made me jump. I noticed Jake was doing the same thing. The sanitarium ruins were honestly underwhelming. Just some crumbling concrete foundations, a partial stone wall, and what might have been a chimney. Tyler was disappointed there wasn't more to see, but I was too distracted to care. I kept positioning myself so I could watch the way we'd come, my back to the group. "Dude, what's wrong with you?" Amber asked after I'd jumped at a noise for the third time. "You're acting super weird." "Nothing," I said too quickly. "Just thought I heard something." We spent maybe 45 minutes poking around the ruins, taking some photos, but my heart wasn't in it. I just wanted to get back to the cars. Every minute we stayed there felt like pushing our luck. Finally, Tyler declared he'd seen enough, and we started heading back down. The walk back was torture. I was at the back of the group with Jake, both of us constantly looking around, our flashlights darting everywhere. The others were chatting about how lame the ruins were, completely oblivious. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every tree branch looked like a reaching arm. When we finally got back to the cars, I felt like I could breathe again. We were standing around, deciding if we should go get food somewhere, when Jake suddenly blurted out, "We saw something up on that hill when we first got here." Everyone turned to look at him. "What are you talking about?" Melissa asked. Jake looked at me and I nodded. It was pointless to keep it secret now that we were safely back at the cars. "I think we saw a Bigfoot," he said. There was a moment of silence, then Tyler burst out laughing. "A Bigfoot? Seriously? That's what you guys have been acting weird about." "I'm not joking," Jake insisted. "Ask Matt. We both saw it." They all looked at me and I nodded again. It was real, about 40 feet up that slope. Big, covered in brown hair, walking on 2 legs. Long arms. It crossed that open patch and went uphill. "You guys are so full of shit," Tyler said, still laughing. "You're trying to freak us out because the sanitarium was boring." "No, we really saw something," I said, getting annoyed now. "We're not making this up." "It was probably just a deer," Amber suggested, "or maybe a bear standing up." "Bears don't walk upright for 30 feet, Jake said, and it wasn't a deer. It was walking on 2 legs the whole time. "And it was huge," I added, "like 7 or 8 feet tall at least, much bigger than a person." "Guys, come on," Melissa said, rolling her eyes. "If you really saw a Bigfoot, why didn't you say something when it happened? Why wait until now?" "Because we didn't want to freak you out," Jake said, "and we didn't want you to make us leave right away." The argument went on for a while, with Jake and me trying to convince them and the others either laughing or offering reasonable explanations. Eventually we gave up. They weren't going to believe us. We all got in our cars and drove back to town, stopping at a McDonald's drive-thru on the way. While we were waiting for our food, Jake texted me, "They don't believe us, but we know what we saw." I texted back, "Yeah, I'm never going back there again." It's been over 3 years now, and I still think about that night all the time. I've researched Bigfoot sightings in Northern California and found that the Mendocino County area has had quite a few reports over the years. I've watched documentaries, read books, joined online forums, trying to make sense of what we saw. The details are still so clear in my mind. The way it moved, purposeful, but somehow fluid. The proportions of its body were all wrong for a human. Too broad, too tall, arms too long, the head sitting directly on the shoulders. The complete silence of its movement. No crashing through brush, just the soft sound of leaves being pushed aside. Jake and I have talked about it many times since then. We were both completely sober that night. We both saw exactly the same thing. Neither of us had any interest in Bigfoot before this happened. I actually thought it was all hoaxes and misidentifications. Not anymore. The others still think we made it up or were seeing things. Tyler especially loves to bring it up when we get together, always with this smirk on his face. Hey Matt, seen any Bigfoots lately? Like it's this hilarious inside joke. But I know what I saw. Something that shouldn't exist, according to science, was walking through those woods that night. Something that watched us from the shadows as we explored those ruins, perhaps following us the whole time. Something that could have easily caught us if it wanted to, but chose not to. I haven't been back to those hills since, and I never will. Some things you only need to see once to know they're real, even if no one else believes you. That night changed how I see the woods, the shadows, the unexplained. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, just experienced, and some creatures are better left undisturbed in their ancient hiding places, far from our prying flashlights and curious eyes. Story 9. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but after all these years, I still can't make sense of what happened. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me understand. It was the summer of 2000, mid-July. My wife Melissa and I had spent the weekend camping near Keno Hill in Yukon territory. We're not fancy campers, just a tent, some basic supplies, and time away from everything. Melissa loves the outdoors more than anyone I know. Being First Nation Canadian, she has this connection to the land that I've always admired, but never fully understood. We packed up early that Monday morning, around 4:30 a.m., wanting to get back to Whitehorse before the day got too hot. The sun was already coming up. Summer in the Yukon means it never really gets dark. The roads were completely empty as we drove south. I remember feeling tired but content, with that weird mixture of being happy about our weekend, but also ready to get home to a proper shower. About 40 minutes into our drive, we were passing near Elsa. Not much more than an old mining settlement these days. I realized I needed to grab our coffee thermos from the back of the truck, and honestly, I also needed to take a leak. We hadn't seen another car for miles, so I pulled over to the side of the gravel road, just grabbing the thermos and taking a quick piss, I told Melissa, who was half asleep in the passenger seat. The air was crisp that morning, maybe 12 degrees Celsius. I grabbed the thermos from the truck bed and walked a few meters toward a stand of spruce trees for some privacy. The ground was soft under my boots, still damp from overnight dew. I remember noticing how quiet it was, that profound silence you only get in places far from cities. No birds singing, no wind, just stillness. I walked maybe 20 meters in, just far enough that Melissa couldn't see me from the truck. I had just set the thermos down and was about to unzip when I noticed something moving about 30 meters ahead through the trees. My first thought was black bear. We'd seen plenty on our trips, and they're common enough in the area, but something felt off immediately. The way it was positioned was strange. It was sitting beside what looked like an elk or deer carcass, not standing on all fours like bears typically do when feeding, but actually sitting, almost like a person would sit. I froze, watching it pull at the remains of whatever animal it had killed. The hair on my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. Bears don't sit like that. They just don't. I took a single step backward, trying to be silent, when I heard Melissa call out, "Thomas, you okay in there?" That's when everything changed. The creature's head snapped up, and in one fluid motion, it stood up on two legs. Not like a bear does occasionally, wobbling and uncertain, but smoothly, naturally, and it kept going up and up and up. I'm 6'2", and weigh about 240 pounds. I'm not a small man, but this thing dwarfed me. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, possibly taller, and it wasn't just tall. It was massive, stocky, with shoulders twice as wide as mine and arms that hung down almost to its knees. It was covered in black hair, not fur, but hair, thick and matted in some places. Its face, God, its face. It was flat and wide with deep-set eyes that looked almost human, but wrong somehow. It had this long, scraggly beard with what looked like bits of leaves and twigs caught in the whiskers. The creature was naked except for the hair covering most of its body, around what I'd call the usual male parts, chest and arms. The hair was thinner on its face, which had this leathery, dark skin. For maybe 3 seconds, we just stared at each other. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. Then it started moving. It began waving its arms up and down, not like it was trying to scare me away, but more like it was agitated or angry. Then it stomped 1 foot forward, then the other. Each step made a heavy thud I could feel through the ground. It was moving toward me with purpose. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. Absolute terror does that to you. It's like your brain short circuits. My legs felt like they were bolted to the forest floor. "Thomas!" Melissa called again, louder this time. That snapped me out of it. I didn't run. I couldn't coordinate my legs enough to stand. I dropped to my hands and knees and started crawling backward, never taking my eyes off the thing. It was still coming, maybe 15 meters away now, close enough that I could smell it. This overwhelming musky odor mixed with something rotten. The creature let out this sound. Not quite a roar, not quite a grunt, but something in between. It echoed through the trees and seemed to vibrate in my chest. That's when my survival instinct finally kicked in properly. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I've ever run in my life. I burst out of the tree line, tripping over roots and nearly falling. Melissa was standing outside the truck looking concerned, and the moment she saw my face, her expression changed. "Get in the truck, now!" I shouted, already running around to the driver's side. To her credit, she didn't ask questions. She jumped in as I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. "What is it? What did you see?" she asked as I started the engine. "We need to go. Now." That's all I could manage to say. As I threw the truck into gear and hit the gas, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there it was, standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. Even from that distance, I could feel its eyes on me. It didn't chase after us. It just stood there observing as we sped away down the gravel road, the thermos left behind and forgotten. We drove for maybe 10 minutes before Melissa finally got me to pull over and explain what happened. I was hyperventilating, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. "I saw something back there," I said, my voice cracking. "Something big. I thought it was a bear at first, but it wasn't. It stood up on 2 legs, Melissa. It was huge, covered in black hair." I expected her to laugh, to tell me I was seeing things, that it was just a bear. But her face went pale. "Did it have a beard?" she asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. Yes, it had this long beard with stuff caught in it. "How did you know that?" She took a deep breath and looked out the window toward the mountains in the distance. "My grandmother used to tell us stories about them when I was little. My people have known about them for generations." "Known about what?" I asked, although I was starting to understand. "Bigfoot," she said simply, "though we have different names for them. I'd heard of Bigfoot, of course. Who hasn't? But I'm English by birth, raised by white adoptive parents near Nova Scotia. Those stories weren't part of my upbringing. They were just silly tabloid headlines to me, not something real people actually believed in." That's crazy," I stammered. "Those are just stories, myths." Melissa looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, dead serious and slightly afraid. "Not to my people," she said. "They're real. They're leftovers from a cast-out tribe, according to the elders. They hunt at night mostly. They're good at it too." I sat there, trying to process what she was saying against what I had just seen. The creature had been sitting beside a fresh kill. It had been eating. How big was it, she asked. 8 feet tall at least, and heavy, not fat but solid, like it weighed twice what I do. She nodded like this confirmed something. They're strong, stronger than any man. For the rest of the drive home, we barely spoke. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following us somehow. Every shadow in the trees looked like a threat. I've never felt so exposed and vulnerable in my life. When we got home, I immediately went online and started researching Bigfoot sightings in Yukon. There were more than I expected, some from very credible sources: hunters, forest rangers, people who knew the wilderness. Many descriptions matched exactly what I'd seen. I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened that day. Maybe it was a bear standing in a weird way. Maybe it was some kind of wilderness hermit. Maybe lack of sleep and the dim morning light played tricks on my eyes. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know it wasn't human. And it wasn't any animal I've ever encountered before or since. The way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate way it tried to intimidate me. Those aren't things I can explain away. Melissa and I have been back to the Yukon many times since then. She's not afraid. She says her people have coexisted with these beings for centuries. But I've never gone more than a few feet into the trees alone again. I can't. The memory of those eyes watching me is too vivid. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away. Would it have attacked me? Was it just defending its territory? Or was it curious about the strange human who stumbled upon its meal? I'll never know. But I do know this. There are things in the wilderness that science hasn't catalogued, things that don't fit neatly into our understanding of the world. I know because I saw one with my own eyes, and no amount of rational thinking can erase that memory. I've never told this story to anyone outside of close family. Most people would think I'm crazy or looking for attention, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still see those eyes staring at me through the trees, and I wonder if somewhere in the Yukon wilderness it remembers me too. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Even typing this makes my hands shake a bit. I'm not someone who believes in monsters or crazy stuff, but what happened at our family property has left me questioning everything I thought I knew. My husband Tom and I own this beautiful 20-acre piece of land near Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes. We've had it for almost 15 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a decent-sized camper we've fixed up over the years, but the land itself is gorgeous. There's a deep creek running through the property and woods that seem to go on forever. We bought it mainly as a place for family gatherings and somewhere our grandkids could run wild without us having to worry about neighbors or traffic. This past spring, back in April, my son Mike and his wife Sarah brought their 3 kids up for the weekend. They just bought the kids new 4-wheelers for their birthdays, and our property with all its trails is perfect for riding. My oldest grandson Jake is 12, Emma is 9, and little Ethan had just turned 7 in February. That Saturday started out perfect. The weather was that beautiful early spring, where it's warm enough during the day but still cool in the evenings. The kids were beyond excited to test out their new 4-wheelers. Mike took them out right after breakfast, while Sarah helped Tom and me set up the fire pit for later. Around 4 in the afternoon, Tom mentioned we should start dinner. The kids had been out riding for hours at that point, so I wasn't worried when I didn't see them around. Our property has lots of marked trails, and Mike knows them all like the back of his hand, since he grew up riding there himself. Tom and I headed back to the camper to start cooking. I remember checking my watch as we walked back. It was 4:23. I only remember the exact time because of what happened next. We'd barely gotten the grill fired up when I heard shouting from the direction of the creek trail. At first, I thought maybe one of the kids had fallen off their 4-wheeler. It happens, usually just scrapes and bruises. But this wasn't that kind of shouting. This was screaming, pure terror. I dropped everything and ran toward the noise with Tom right behind me. As we got closer, I could see Mike running up the trail carrying Ethan, who was absolutely hysterical. Jake and Emma were right behind them, looking scared out of their minds. Mike was trying to calm Ethan down, but the poor kid was inconsolable, face red, tears streaming and shaking like a leaf. He kept pointing back toward the creek and trying to talk through his sobs. At first, I couldn't make out what he was saying. "What happened?" I asked Mike, my heart pounding. Mike looked shaken himself. "I don't know, Mom. Ethan was riding a little ahead of us on the trail near the big bend in the creek. You know that spot where it widens out with all the flat rocks?" I nodded. He suddenly stopped and just started screaming. By the time I got to him, he was trying to back his four-wheeler up, nearly tipping it over. Mike lowered his voice so Ethan couldn't hear. I didn't see anything myself, but I heard branches snapping and the bushes on the other side of the creek were moving like crazy. Whatever it was big, much bigger than a deer. Ethan had calmed down just enough to start talking. Between sobs, he kept saying, "The monster, Daddy, the big hairy monster." He clung to Mike's leg like his life depended on it. We all walked back to the camper, with Ethan refusing to let go of Mike. Sarah took him inside, while Tom and I got the other kids settled at the picnic table with some juice. They were scared too, though they hadn't seen anything themselves. After about an hour, Ethan had calmed down enough to tell us what he saw. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. This wasn't a kid making up a story for attention. He was genuinely terrified. "I was riding my four-wheeler, and I stopped to look at a frog by the creek," he explained, his voice small and still shaky. "Then I heard something across the water. When I looked up, there was this big, hairy thing crouched down low behind some bushes. It was watching me." "What did it look like, buddy?" Tom asked gently. Ethan thought for a moment. "It was big, bigger than any dog, all covered in hair. The hair was kind of different colors, like light and dark patches." He paused. "It looked like the monster from Harry and the Hendersons, but scarier. And it had this weird lump on its head." Now, Ethan had watched that movie with us just a month before, so at first I thought maybe his imagination was running wild. But the specific details he gave next made my skin crawl. It had these eyes that looked right at me, not like animal eyes, smart eyes, and when it saw me looking, it stood up a little bit. It was so tall. He stretched his arms up high, then it put its finger to its mouth like this. He demonstrated a shushing gesture. That's when I got scared and screamed. Mike confirmed that he'd heard something large moving through the underbrush, though he hadn't seen the creature himself. Whatever it was, it moved away fast. Too fast for a bear, honestly. That evening, none of us felt much like sitting around the campfire as we'd planned. We stayed close to the camper, and the kids didn't want to be outside at all after dark. Tom tried to lighten the mood by making s'mores on the stove, but even that didn't help much. Later, after the kids were finally asleep in the camper's back bedroom, Tom mentioned something that gave me chills all over again. "You know," he said quietly, sipping his coffee, "there've always been stories about strange things around Seneca Lake. Old man Jenkins, who owned the property before us, used to talk about seeing things in these woods that he couldn't explain." Sarah, who'd been scrolling on her phone, looked up. "You guys aren't going to believe this. I just Googled Finger Lake's Bigfoot sightings, and there are dozens of reports from this area going back decades. Some of them describe exactly what Ethan said. The patchy fur, the lump on the head. We all went quiet after that. Tom tried to brush it off, saying it was probably just a bear, but I could tell he was unsettled too. I know bears. We've had them on our property before. Bears don't put fingers to their lips to shush you. None of us slept well that night. Around 3 in the morning, Tom nudged me awake. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I listened and heard a faint tapping sound outside. Tap, tap, tap against the side of the camper, like something gently knocking. It moved from one end to the other, then stopped. "Probably just a branch in the wind," I whispered back, not believing it for a second. There was no wind that night. The next morning I noticed my cat Millie was missing. She's an indoor cat who occasionally ventures outside when we're at the property, but she always stays close to the camper and comes when called. We looked everywhere for her, but she was nowhere to be found. That was 6 months ago, and she's never returned. We've been back to the property several times since then. Jake and Emma eventually started riding their four-wheelers again, but Ethan flat out refuses. He won't go anywhere near the creek now. He stays right by the camper, and if he does ride, he only uses the short trail that circles the immediate area. I've tried to convince myself it was just a bear that scared him. That's the logical explanation. But logic doesn't explain why I now hear strange vocalizations in the evenings, calls that don't sound like any animal native to our woods. It doesn't explain why our dog Rex, who loves running through those woods, now refuses to leave the porch after sunset, growling at the tree line. Last weekend, I was alone at the property for the first time since the incident. Tom had to work, and I went up to close things down for the winter. Around dusk, I was securing the shed when I distinctly heard heavy footsteps in the woods behind me. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped when I turned around. I called out, thinking maybe a hunter had wandered onto our land. No response, just silence. I hurried back to the camper and locked the door, feeling ridiculous but unable to shake the sensation of being watched. As I was pulling the curtains closed, I swear I saw something move at the edge of the woods, something large and dark that didn't move like a deer or bear. I left first thing the next morning without finishing all my winterizing tasks. I just couldn't stay there alone another night. I've tried researching local Bigfoot sightings, and what I've found has only made me more uneasy. The Finger Lakes region apparently has a long history of these encounters, many describing similar features to what Ethan saw. I don't know what to believe anymore. I've lived 62 years without believing in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. But I know my grandson, Ethan, isn't the type to make up stories, and he certainly wouldn't stick to one this consistently for months. Whatever he saw that day terrified him deeply. The property that once felt like our family's safe haven now feels different. There's a tension in the air I can't explain. I find myself watching the tree line, listening for unusual sounds. Tom says I'm letting my imagination run wild, but then he's the one who insists we always leave before dark now. I'm not sure what to do. We love our property, and I don't want to sell it based on one unexplained incident. But I also can't ignore the fact that something out there frightened my grandson so badly he won't go near the creek anymore, and sometimes, when I'm there alone, I can't shake the feeling that we're not the only ones who consider that land home. Story 11. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. I keep telling myself it was just my imagination, or maybe the stress from my time overseas finally catching up with me, but deep down, I know what I saw, what's been hanging around my property for years. This happened just a few weeks ago in June, but the story really starts back in 2008. I'm a vet, did 2 tours in Iraq between 2005 and 2008. Coming back to our place in rural Georgia was supposed to be peaceful. We've got about 3 acres, backing up to hundreds of acres of dense forest. There's a creek about a mile back in those woods. It's isolated, quiet, exactly what I needed after deployment. So back in May 2008, my wife Jen and I had just gotten home from dinner at this little steakhouse in town. It was around 10:30, dark as hell out there since we don't have any streetlights. I needed to feed our 2 pit bulls, Diesel and Rex, who we keep in a pen in the backyard. I remember it was unusually cool that night, with this weird fog hanging low over the yard. I was about halfway between our back porch and the dog pen when I heard it. This long, low moan that rose into a howl coming from the woods behind our property, maybe 100 yards back. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a coyote, not a wolf, definitely not a person. It was deep, powerful, and seemed to vibrate through my chest. The dogs went absolutely nuts, barking and throwing themselves against the fence of their pen. I froze in my tracks. Every hair on my body stood up. I'm not easily spooked. I've been in actual war zones, But something about that sound triggered some primal part of my brain. I felt like prey. After feeding the dogs as quickly as possible, I hustled back inside and locked the door behind me. I didn't tell Jen about it because I figured she'd either think I was crazy or get scared unnecessarily. Instead, I got on the computer later that night and started searching for weird howling sounds in woods and similar phrases. After an hour of digging through wildlife videos, I stumbled across an audio recording labeled Ohio Moan Howl. My blood ran cold. It was exactly what I'd heard. The recording was supposedly of a Bigfoot, which I'd always considered complete bullshit. I closed the browser and tried to forget about it. A few weeks later, I finally mentioned the incident to Jen in passing. Her reaction shocked me. She went really quiet, then told me something she'd never shared before. During my 2005-2006 deployment, she kept hearing rocks and sticks hitting our detached garage at night. She thought it was just local kids messing around at first, but it happened too often, always late at night. Her brother had come to stay with her for a week during that time, and on his third night there, they both heard the banging on the garage. He grabbed a flashlight and my shotgun and went out to investigate. He came back inside looking pale. All he said was, "You've got something out in those woods." He refused to elaborate, and she never pushed him on it. After that, I started paying closer attention to strange occurrences around our property. Sometimes our dogs would refuse to go into certain parts of the yard. We'd find branches arranged in weird patterns that seemed deliberately placed. Occasionally, we'd hear wood knocking sounds from deep in the forest at night, but I never saw anything concrete, and eventually I convinced myself it was just wildlife or my imagination, until 3 weeks ago. It was June 12th, 2024. I remember the date precisely because it was unusually cold for June in Georgia, maybe 50 degrees at night. I couldn't sleep, so around 1 in the morning, I went out to the back porch to smoke a cigarette. We've got motion sensor lights that illuminate about 20 feet out from the house, but beyond that is pure darkness. I was just standing there, staring absently into the night, when I caught movement in my peripheral vision near the edge of the yard where the forest begins. I turned my head slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements. That's when I saw it. Not the full creature, but the back half of something enormous moving behind some overgrown bushes at the tree line. It was moving from right to left, partially obscured, but what I could see made my cigarette drop from my fingers. The thing was massive. There's a branch on one of the trees that I know is about 10 feet off the ground, because I tried to trim it last summer and couldn't reach it even with my extension ladder. The head of whatever I was looking at aligned perfectly with that branch. Its shoulders had to be at least 4 feet across, no exaggeration. It had no visible neck. The head seemed to sit directly on those massive shoulders. The fur covering it was thick and matted, looking exactly like an uncombed winter coat on a horse. This dark, shaggy mass that absorbed light rather than reflected it. But what really got me was how it moved. I've never seen anything that large move so fast or with such power. It covered about 7 feet in a single stride, completely silent despite its size. 1 second it was there, the next it had vanished into the tree line. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 3 or 4 seconds. I stood frozen on that porch for probably 10 minutes, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Eventually I backed slowly into the house, locked the door, and sat up the rest of the night with my shotgun across my lap. The next morning, I went out to investigate. In the daylight, everything seemed normal, but when I got to the spot where I'd seen the creature, I found several broken branches about 9 feet up on the trees, fresh breaks with sap still oozing, and on the ground, partially pressed into the soft earth, was a footprint. At least I think it was a footprint. It was about 17 inches long and incredibly wide, with what looked like 5 toes. The impression wasn't perfect, just enough to make out the rough shape in the pine needles and dirt. I took photos with my phone, but they didn't capture much. By the time I went back out later that day with a better camera, A brief thunderstorm had washed away any evidence. Since then, I've been researching obsessively. Our property borders about 15,000 acres of mostly unexplored forest. There's that creek I mentioned, plenty of game. Caves in the hills about 5 miles back. It's perfect habitat. Something could live back there for years, generations even, without ever being discovered, unless it wanted to be seen. I've installed more security cameras around the property, but deep down I know they probably won't catch anything. Whatever this thing is, it's smart enough to have stayed hidden all these years. I think it only showed itself because it was an unusually cold night, and maybe it was looking for food or shelter closer to our property. The weirdest part? Our dogs have been acting different since that night. They used to bark at every squirrel or deer that came near the property. Now they go dead silent whenever something moves in those woods at night. It's like they know better than to draw attention to themselves. Last week, I found a half-eaten deer carcass about 50 yards into the woods behind our house. Whatever killed it hadn't used teeth like a predator would. It looked like the deer had been torn apart by incredibly strong hands. I didn't tell Jen about that one. I'm not sleeping much these days. Every night around 1 or 2 in the morning, I find myself standing at our bedroom window, staring out at those woods. Sometimes I think I see shadows moving between the trees, but it could just be my imagination working overtime. The rational part of me still wants to believe there's a logical explanation for all of this. Maybe it's a bear with mange, maybe it's some undiscovered species of primate, or maybe, and this is what keeps me up at night, maybe the old legends about Sasquatch aren't just stories. All I know is that something enormous is living in those woods behind my house. Something that's been there for years, watching us, occasionally making itself known. And now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. I keep wondering if it's just passing through, or if it considers our property part of its territory. I haven't told anyone else about this besides Jen. People around here would think I'm crazy or looking for attention, but I know what I saw. I just don't know what to do about it. Do I try to document it? Leave it alone? Move away? For now, I'm just watching and waiting and keeping my shotgun a lot closer than I used to. Story 12. I've always considered myself a practical guy. I hunt, I fish. I'm the dad who teaches his son how to change a tire instead of calling AAA. But what happened 3 weeks ago at Plum Creek has completely shattered my understanding of what's out there in the woods. I'm not writing this for attention or to convince anyone. Honestly, I just need to get this off my chest because the nightmares won't stop. My son Tyler, he's 14, and I had planned a bow fishing trip that Saturday. It was late August, perfect weather. Not too hot, slight breeze, just enough clouds to keep the sun from beating down on us. We've been to Plum Creek dozens of times. It's about 40 minutes from our house, and there's this marshy area past the old railroad bridges that's usually good for bow fishing. We brought along our dog Max. He's a chocolate lab mix, about 80 pounds, good hunting dog. Tyler was excited because I'd just bought him his own bow after he'd been using my spare for the past year. The kid's got a good eye. We parked at our usual spot around 2 in the afternoon, gathered our gear and headed down the trail. You have to pass under 4 old railroad bridges to get to the good fishing spots. These bridges aren't used anymore. They're these massive wooden structures, probably built in the 30s, covered in graffiti now. The trail underneath them is always muddy, and the spaces between them create these weird echo chambers. After we passed under the 4th bridge, we decided to try a new spot deeper in the marsh than we usually go. Tyler spotted some movement in the water about 100 yards in, so we carefully picked our way through the cattails and muck. Max was ahead of us, as usual, nose to the ground and tail wagging. That's when things started getting weird. Max suddenly froze. His ears perked up and the hair on his back stood straight up. I've only seen him do this a couple times before, once when we had a black bear wander through our backyard, and another time when he cornered a coyote during a hunt. Before I could call him back, he darted forward into a particularly dense patch of reeds and brush. There was this moment, this split second of absolute stillness, and then the entire area erupted. The trees on the edge of the marsh started shaking violently, not just small branches, but entire trees swaying. The sound was what got me, a deep, huffing noise followed by crashing as whatever was there moved through the underbrush. "Dad?" Tyler's voice was tight. "What was that?" "Probably just some bedded deer," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't true. Deer don't make trees shake like that, and they definitely don't make that huffing sound. Max came trotting back to us, looking pleased with himself but also strangely agitated. He kept looking back toward where the commotion had been. Maybe I should have turned around right then. That's what keeps me up at night, the what-ifs. But instead, I convinced myself it was nothing. We spent another hour or so fishing, caught a few small ones, but my mind wasn't really on it. Something felt off about the whole area. You know that feeling when you're being watched? It was like that, but multiplied by 100. Around 5, we decided to head back. The sun was starting to set, and I wanted to be out of the marsh before dark. We made our way back toward the railroad bridges, and that's when the second incident happened. We were between the first and second bridge when police sirens started wailing in the distance. The sound echoed across the marsh, breaking the natural quiet. I set down my bow for a second to check my phone. There's a police scanner app I use sometimes when we're out in remote areas, just to stay informed about any emergencies. As I was looking down at my phone, I heard it, a loud rustling from a tree about 15 yards to my left. Not the gentle sound of leaves in the wind, but the violent shaking of branches under significant weight. Then a heavy thud as something hit the ground. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was crouched low to the ground, partially hidden by undergrowth, but unmistakably massive. If I had to guess, even hunched over, it was at least 7 feet tall. The shape was all wrong for a bear, too upright, too proportioned like a human, but much larger. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, easily twice the width of mine. For what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, we just stared at each other. It was dark, not black, but a deep brown color. And its eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They weren't animal eyes. There was something in them. Intelligence, calculation. Then it moved, not away from us, but directly toward us. It didn't charge exactly, but it covered ground so quickly through the thick brush that it might as well have been charging. Max went absolutely ballistic. He launched himself forward, barking and growling like I've never heard before. He's not an aggressive dog. He'll chase squirrels and bark at strangers, but this was different. This was primal. As soon as Max charged, the thing changed direction so fast it seemed impossible for something that size. It bolted through the underbrush away from us, moving with a speed that defied its bulk. The way it moved. It wasn't running on all fours like a bear, but it wasn't exactly upright either. It was this bizarre in-between gait that let it navigate the dense vegetation with terrifying efficiency. Max chased after it, still barking like crazy, until I finally found my voice and called him back. He returned reluctantly, still facing the direction the creature had gone, growling deep in his throat. When I turned to Tyler, his face was white as paper. "Dad," he whispered, "what was that?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe a bear?" He shook his head. "It was as big as a bear, but it looked like a gorilla. Did you see how it moved?" I nodded, because he was right. It hadn't moved like any animal I've ever seen, and I've been hunting these woods since I was younger than Tyler. We started walking quickly toward the bridges, Max staying unusually close to us. We'd gone maybe 30 yards when we heard it, a crunching sound on the ground behind us. Something was moving through the brush, paralleling our path, but staying just out of sight. "Don't run," I whispered to Tyler. "Just keep walking." The sound followed us all the way to the second bridge. It wasn't trying to catch up to us, just following, watching. Sometimes the sound would stop completely, and those moments were worse than the following, because I knew it was still there, just being deliberately silent. When we reached the second bridge, I couldn't take it anymore. "Let's go," I said, and we broke into a jog, then a full-on run. We didn't stop until we reached the car. I threw our gear in the back, not even bothering to secure the bows properly like I usually would. Max jumped in, still on high alert, and I locked the doors before starting the engine. As we pulled away, Tyler kept looking out the window back toward the marsh. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think that was a Bigfoot?" 3 weeks ago, I would have laughed at the question. I would have explained about known wildlife and tricks of light and imagination. But after what we saw, I don't know anymore. What I do know is this: something was in that marsh, something big, intelligent, and not supposed to be there. It watched us, followed us, and for whatever reason, decided not to come after us when it could have. I haven't told anyone except my wife about this. She thinks we saw a bear, and our imaginations filled in the rest. Maybe she's right. Maybe the stress of the moment, the fading light, and the adrenaline all combined to make us see something that wasn't there. But Max knows. He hasn't been the same since. He refuses to go into our backyard at night now. He sleeps pressed against our bedroom door, and sometimes, when there's a noise outside, he gets that same look he had in the marsh, alert, terrified, and ready to protect us from something he knows is out there. I've been researching since it happened. There have been other reports in the area over the years, hikers seeing large figures in the distance, hunters finding strange footprints, campers hearing unusual vocalizations at night. Nothing concrete enough to make the news, but enough to make me wonder. We haven't been back to Plum Creek. Tyler hasn't even asked, which is unusual because he normally can't wait to go fishing. When I mentioned maybe trying a different spot next weekend, he just shook his head and said he had homework. I keep replaying that moment in my head, the intelligence in those eyes, the deliberate way it moved, how it waited until I was distracted before it revealed itself. Whatever was watching us that day, it wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. It made decisions. It calculated. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late from work and pass by the woods near our house, I catch myself scanning the tree line, looking for movement, looking for eyes, because the thing that scares me most isn't that we saw something unexplainable out in the marsh. It's the possibility that it saw us too, really saw us. And now it knows exactly what we look like and the direction we headed when we left. I still don't know what to call what we encountered that day. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some undiscovered species, a man in a suit playing an elaborate prank. All I know is that my son and I saw something that shouldn't exist, and no rational explanation I've come up with in the weeks since has managed to convince me otherwise. So I guess I'm posting this as a warning. If you're heading out to Plum Creek, especially around those old railroad bridges, watch your surroundings. Don't go alone. And if your dog suddenly goes on alert for no apparent reason, maybe listen to them. They might be sensing something that you can't. As for me, I think I'm done with bow fishing for a while. There are plenty of lakes around here with clear shorelines and open spaces. Places where you can see what's coming from a long way off. Places where there's nowhere for something 7 feet tall to hide and watch you, because that's what it was doing, watching us. And I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting for the next person to wander too deep into the marsh. Story 13. I never expected to talk about this publicly, but after what happened with my son last week, I need to get this off my chest. I've been carrying this memory for almost 30 years, and I've only told a handful of people about it. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this. It was fall of 1994. I was 9 years old, living with my family on our farmland outside Wasilla, Alaska. When I say isolated, I mean isolated. Our nearest neighbors were about 2 miles away, and we were surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides of our property. My dad had moved us there from Anchorage when I was 5 because he wanted to live off the grid as much as possible. That day started like any other Saturday. My mom was inside making preserves from the last of our garden harvest, and my dad had gone into town for supplies. My older brother Jake, he was 13, and I were tasked with burning the week's trash in an old oil drum at the edge of our property, near where our land met the tree line. It was chilly, probably low 40s, with that crisp autumn smell in the air. We were wearing our puffy jackets and those cheap knit gloves that never really keep your fingers warm. Jake had driven us out to the burn barrel on our old three-wheeler, with me clinging to his back. I remember being annoyed because he kept hitting bumps on purpose to make me bounce. We had the trash fire going good, and Jake was poking at it with a stick while I wandered around collecting pine cones. I was about 20 feet from the barrel when I heard it, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the air around me. It wasn't like a dog or even a bear. It was deeper somehow, lower. It felt like it was coming from something massive. I froze, the pine cones dropping from my hands. "Jake," I called, not taking my eyes off the tree line where the sound had come from. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. About 50 yards away, where our cleared land met the dense forest, something huge and dark was moving between the trees. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a bear standing up? But no, this thing was walking upright the whole time, moving with purpose. It was tall, way taller than my dad, who was 6 feet. It had to be at least 7 or 8 feet high. The thing that sticks with me most was the way it moved. Not like a person exactly. It had this slight hunch to it, almost like its arms were too long for its body, and it was completely covered in dark hair or fur. Not patchy like a mangy bear, but fully covered. The hair looked longest around its shoulders and head. I couldn't make out a face, thank God, but I could tell it was looking directly at us. Even from that distance, I felt noticed, like it was aware of us in a way that animals usually aren't. "Jake!" I hissed louder, not wanting to make too much noise. "Look over there!" Jake turned around, annoyed at first, but his expression changed when he saw my face. He looked toward where I was pointing, but by then the figure was moving back into the trees. All Jake caught was a glimpse of movement before it disappeared completely into the forest. "What the hell was that?" Jake whispered, suddenly right beside me. I'd never heard him swear before. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. It was big and hairy and walking on 2 legs. We didn't need to discuss what to do next. Jake grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the three-wheeler. He didn't even bother putting out the fire properly, just kicked some dirt on it and left it smoking. I remember he actually lifted me onto the seat instead of making me climb up myself, something he'd never done before. The ride back to the house was terrifying. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that whatever I'd seen was following us through the trees that lined our dirt path. Jake drove so fast that I nearly fell off twice. When we got back to the house, we burst through the door, talking over each other, trying to explain to my mom what we'd seen. My mom, bless her, thought we were making it up at first. "It was probably just a bear," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "They do stand on their hind legs sometimes." "No, Mom," I insisted. "It was walking like a person the whole time. Bears don't do that." Here's the thing. I'd never heard of Bigfoot at that age. Growing up in Alaska, we were taught about bears, moose, wolves, real animals that posed real dangers. So when I tried to describe what I'd seen, the only thing I could come up with was, maybe it's a bear that walks funny. My mom must have seen how genuinely scared we were because she called us both into the kitchen and made us hot chocolate, something she only did on special occasions. While we sat at the table, still shivering despite the warmth of the house, we heard our dogs start going crazy. We had 3 huskies that stayed in a pen behind the barn. They were working dogs, not really pets, and they weren't the type to bark without reason. But suddenly they were howling and barking in a way I'd never heard before, frantic, desperate. Then came the sound of them throwing themselves against the chain-link fence of their pen. My mom went to the window but couldn't see the dog pen from the kitchen. "They probably just smell that bear," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Jake and I looked at each other across the table. We both knew it wasn't a bear. The dogs kept it up for nearly an hour. When my dad got home, he grabbed his rifle and went out to check on them. He came back saying he'd found nothing, but the dogs were acting strange, pacing in circles and refusing to settle down even after he fed them. That night, I couldn't sleep. My bedroom window faced the forest, and I kept imagining I could see a tall, dark shape standing at the edge of the trees, watching our house. I ended up dragging my blankets into Jake's room and sleeping on his floor. He didn't tease me about it, which was unusual for him. I think he was just as scared as I was. For weeks afterward, I refused to go near the tree line alone. Even in daylight, I felt watched whenever I played in our yard. The feeling eventually faded, as did the memory. Not completely, but enough that it became one of those childhood stories you're not sure whether to believe yourself. As I got older and learned about Bigfoot sightings, I started to realize what I might have seen that day. I researched similar encounters in Alaska and found dozens of reports describing almost exactly what I'd witnessed. I even found a report from a family about 10 miles from our old property who claimed to have seen a similar creature just a month before my encounter. I never told my own kids about what happened. What would be the point of scaring them? My husband and I ended up settling about 20 miles from my childhood home, close enough to visit my parents easily, but far enough that I didn't have to drive past those same woods every day. Until last week, I thought this was just a strange story from my childhood. I'd mostly convinced myself it was probably just a bear that my 9-year-old mind had transformed into something more sinister. I mean, 30 years is a long time to question your own memories. Then my 11-year-old son Tyler came running into the house last Thursday afternoon. He'd been playing in the backfield of our property, not far from the house, but near the edge where our cleared land meets the forest. His face was pale, and he was breathing so hard he could barely speak. When he finally calmed down enough to talk, what he described made my blood run cold. "Mom," he gasped. There was something in the trees watching me. It was huge and dark and standing up like a person, but it wasn't a person. When I looked at it, it moved back into the trees, but it didn't stop looking at me. I felt like I was 9 years old again, sitting at my mother's kitchen table while the dogs howled outside. The similarity between Tyler's description and what I'd seen was too precise to be coincidence. "Where exactly did you see it?" I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady. Tyler led me to our back window and pointed to the tree line, to a specific spot where the forest seems to dip inward slightly. It's the same spot where our property borders what used to be my parents' land, near where Jake and I burned trash that day in 1994. I didn't tell Tyler about my own experience then. I didn't want to feed whatever fear or imagination might have affected what he thought he saw. Instead, I called my husband, who checked the area and found nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing to indicate that anything unusual had been there. But he did mention that our neighbor's dogs had been barking non-stop that afternoon. I don't know what to make of this. Is it possible that the same creature I saw 30 years ago is still roaming these woods? Or is there something about that particular stretch of forest that plays tricks on the eyes? Maybe it's genetic, some shared tendency between me and my son to transform ordinary shadows into monsters. Or maybe, just maybe, there really is something out there. Last night, I found Tyler sitting by his bedroom window with the lights off, staring out toward the tree line. When I asked what he was doing, he just said, "Watching." I pulled him away and made him promise not to look for whatever he thought he saw. I didn't tell him that after he went to bed, I found myself standing at the same window, scanning the darkness, half expecting to see a tall, hunched silhouette emerge from the trees. I don't know what I'm going to do. We can't just pack up and move, and I can't stop my son from playing outside based on something I'm still not entirely sure I actually saw all those years ago. But every time he goes out now, I watch him like a hawk. and I find myself listening for the sound of our neighbor's dogs barking. Whatever it was I saw as a child, and whatever Tyler saw last week, it's still out there, waiting, watching. And for some reason, it's drawn to this specific stretch of Alaskan wilderness that my family just can't seem to escape. Story 14. I've been holding this in for almost 50 years, and I need to get it off my chest. What my family and I experienced in the mountains outside LA back in the 70s still gives me nightmares. I was just a young father then. Now I'm an old man, but I can remember every detail like it happened yesterday. It was early February of '74 when it all started. My wife Hilda and I had moved to this small cabin in Los Angeles County with our baby son Michael. We wanted a simpler life away from the city, somewhere peaceful where we could raise our boy close to nature. The cabin was nestled in the San Gabriel Mountains, about 40 minutes from civilization. No close neighbors, just woods and mountains all around. We thought it was perfect. The first weird thing happened about 2 weeks after we moved in. Michael was 6 months old at the time, a happy baby who rarely fussed. But one evening, when Hilda put him in his crib by the window, he started screaming. Not crying, screaming, the kind that makes your blood run cold. Hilda picked him up immediately, and he calmed down. We figured maybe he was just being fussy. The next night, same thing. The moment she put him down under that window, he would scream bloody murder. We moved his crib to the other side of the room, and he was fine. I thought maybe there was a draft or the window rattled. I checked everything. The window was secure, no drafts. But Michael wouldn't sleep anywhere near it. A few days later, our dog Rex started acting strange. He was a German Shepherd mix, about 4 years old, not easily spooked. That evening, he began pacing around the cabin, growling at the walls. His hackles were up, and he kept staring at that same window where Michael wouldn't sleep. Around midnight, he started barking like crazy, scratching at the door to get out. I thought maybe it was a coyote or raccoon. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and let him out, figuring he'd chase whatever it was away. Big mistake. He bolted into the darkness, barking frantically. I called for him, but he didn't come back. I searched around the cabin with my flashlight, but the woods were pitch black. I couldn't go too far from the house with Hilda and the baby inside. The next morning, I found Rex, or what was left of him. He was up by our water tank, about 100 yards from the cabin. He'd been torn apart, not eaten, just dismembered. His legs were separated from his body. His head was 20 feet away. There was surprisingly little blood. Whatever did this wasn't hunting for food. It felt deliberate, like a message. I told Hilda it was probably coyotes or maybe a mountain lion, but I didn't believe it myself. I'd hunted all my life and never seen predators do anything like that. They kill to eat, not to display. I buried Rex's remains and tried not to let Hilda see how shaken I was. About a week later, I went fishing at a stream about a mile from our cabin. Had good luck that day. Caught 7 decent-sized trout. I cleaned them at the stream and strung them up when I got home. We had this old telephone pole near the cabin that I used to hang things out of reach of animals. I put the fish about 12 feet up, planning to smoke them the next day. When I went out in the morning, the fish were gone, not just fallen down, completely gone. The string was still there, hanging from the nail, but it had been snapped, 12 feet high. No animal I knew could reach that high, and why would they take the fish but leave the string? It didn't make sense. That's when I started noticing the footprints. At first, I only found a few scattered around the property. Enormous tracks, some measuring 19 inches long. They had 3 toes and no arch, unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not bear, not human. I made plaster casts of a few of the clearer ones, thinking no one would believe me otherwise. Then came the screams. The first time we heard it, Hilda and I both shot straight up in bed. It was around 2 in the morning. The sound echoed through the mountains, a high-pitched, terrified woman's scream. It went on for nearly 30 seconds. I grabbed my rifle and went to the door, thinking someone might be in trouble. Hilda begged me not to go out. "That's not human, Andrew," she whispered. "Nothing human sounds like that." I stood at the door listening. The scream came again, but this time I could tell it was moving, traveling along the ridge above our property at a speed no person could manage on foot in the dark. I locked the door and stayed inside. The screams became a regular occurrence after that, always at night, always sounding like a woman in terrible distress, but moving too fast, covering too much ground to be human. One night in early March, things escalated. We were all asleep when something hit the side of our cabin with tremendous force. The whole structure shook. It sounded like someone had thrown a boulder against the wall. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my rifle, and looked out the window. Nothing, but there on the side of the cabin were deep scratches in the wood, about 8 feet up. Whatever had made them was strong. The marks were nearly half an inch deep in solid pine. The baby was crying. Hilda was terrified. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping the noise would scare it off. There was a rustling sound in the underbrush, then silence. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. By April, whatever these things were, they grew bolder. One evening at dusk, I was chopping wood when I noticed movement by the water tank. I froze. Standing there, drinking from the overflow pipe, I still don't know how to describe it. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, walking on 2 legs but hunched over. It had long, stringy hair of a dirty white color that hung down its back. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, but I could tell it wasn't human. I slowly raised my axe, not as a threat, but because I was paralyzed with fear and had been in mid-swing when I spotted it. The creature noticed the movement and looked directly at me. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel its gaze. It didn't run. It just stared at me for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then it turned and walked, not ran, walked, into the woods, moving uphill with an ease that defied logic. Nothing that big should move so effortlessly up a steep incline. I told Hilda what I'd seen. She started crying, saying she'd seen something similar watching her through the kitchen window a few days before, but hadn't wanted to scare me. She described deep-set eyes, a flat nose, and, this detail has always stuck with me, large breasts. Whatever these things were, at least some of them were female. The smell came next. Anyone who's ever encountered one of these creatures knows the smell. It's not like anything else. Closest I can compare it to is goat or possum urine, but more powerful, more primal. It would come in waves, sometimes so strong it would wake us from sleep. The smell meant they were close. They started throwing rocks at our roof, not little pebbles, hefty stones that would hit with a loud bang and sometimes roll down to the ground. This happened almost nightly through April. I'd go outside with my rifle and flashlight, and sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of red eyes reflecting in the beam. Just for a second, then they'd be gone. One night I heard something on the porch. I grabbed my flashlight and threw open the door. Standing there, not 10 feet away, was one of them. The flashlight beam caught it full in the face. Those eyes, red and glowing like embers, will haunt me till the day I die. Its face was almost human but wrong somehow. The proportions were off. Its mouth was too wide, its nose too flat. The hair on its head hung in dirty clumps. It didn't run. It made this sound, a low hum that vibrated in my chest. I raised my rifle, and only then did it move, but not in fear. It simply turned and walked away, looking back once as if to make sure I was watching. It wanted me to see it. The next morning I found a dead rabbit on our porch, not torn apart like Rex had been, just dead, neck broken, placed carefully at our door like a gift or a warning. Hilda wanted to leave. I was stubborn. This was our home, I said. I wouldn't be driven off by whatever these things were. I was a fool. The final straw came in late April. Hilda and the baby were napping one afternoon. I was outside, reinforcing the shed door. I heard Michael start crying, then Hilda screaming. I ran into the house to find her backed into a corner, holding Michael tight against her chest. She was pointing at the bedroom window, hysterical. It was looking in at us, she sobbed. It was watching us sleep. The window was a good 7 feet off the ground. Whatever had looked in had to have been tall or able to climb. There were muddy smears on the glass and a few strands of that same dirty white hair caught in a splinter on the sill. We packed up that night and left. Didn't even take most of our things. Drove straight to my brother's place in San Diego and stayed there until we could find a new place in the city. I went back once, about a month later, to get the rest of our belongings. The cabin had been ransacked, not by humans. There were those three-toed prints all through the house. The furniture was shredded, and that smell permeated everything. I never reported any of this to the authorities. Who would believe me? We didn't tell many people either, just family, and even they looked at us like we were crazy. But I know what we experienced. I've spent decades researching, trying to understand what those creatures were. Bigfoot? Maybe, but the descriptions never quite match. Something else? I don't know. All I know is they were real, they were intelligent, and they wanted us gone. Sometimes I still hear those screams in my dreams, a woman's voice, terrified, moving too fast through the dark mountains. And I wake up wondering if they're still out there, watching other families through their windows at night. Story 15. I've been hunting in the Scioto River bottoms outside Circleville all my life. My dad took me there for my first hunt when I was 12. And I've been going back ever since. 20-some years of tracking deer through those woods, and I thought I knew every inch of that place. Thought I'd seen everything those woods had to offer. I was wrong. This happened last November, right in the heart of bow season. I'd taken a Friday off work to get a long weekend of hunting in before the rut ended. The weather was perfect. Cool but not cold. Overcast with just a light breeze, the kind of day deer should be moving. But they weren't, at least not where I was. I'd been in my stand since before dawn, about 30 yards from a well-used trail that cuts through some thick brush near the river. For 9 hours I sat there watching squirrels and not much else. No deer, not even a turkey. Just wasted hours feeling my ass go numb on the hard metal seat of my climber. By late afternoon, I'd had enough. The light was starting to fade, and I figured I'd climb down and still hunt my way back to the truck. For those who don't hunt, still hunting means moving slowly and quietly through the woods, stopping frequently to look and listen. It's actually my favorite way to hunt, but I rarely get to do it because sitting in a stand is usually more effective. I packed up my gear, lowered my bow, and climbed down. The woods were dead quiet. That strange, muffled silence you sometimes get in the fall when the leaves are wet and there's no wind. I could hear the occasional splash from the river about 70 yards to my right as I started following the trail that runs parallel to it. The path winds through some pretty thick stuff in places, lots of multiflora rose and honeysuckle that's a pain in the ass to push through. But there's a section where it opens up a bit as it curves closer to the river, creating a kind of natural clearing where deer sometimes bed down. I was moving extra slow and quiet as I approached this bend, watching my footing on the damp leaves. The light was getting pretty dim by then, maybe 20 minutes of shooting light left, if that. As I rounded the curve near the riverbank, something caught my eye. At first, it was just movement. Something dark, shifting against the ground about 10 to 15 yards ahead of me, just past a patch of tall grass. My first thought was that someone had fallen or was lying down by the river, but something felt off immediately. I froze in place, my bow in my left hand, and just stared. What I was looking at didn't make sense to my brain at first. It was stretched out on the ground, lying on its stomach with its legs extended straight behind it. But the proportions were all wrong for a person. Its back was impossibly wide, easily twice as broad as mine, and I'm not a small guy. Its elbows were up, almost like it had been propping itself up to look at the water. The thing's head was slightly raised, and that's when I realized it had noticed me. In one fluid motion, it rose onto its right arm and twisted the upper half of its body to look directly at me. I couldn't make out its face clearly in the dim light, but I could feel it watching me. Its head was massive, not round like a human's, but like it sat forward on the shoulders, with what looked like a heavy brow ridge. The way it held itself was both familiar and alien at the same time. It remained partly propped on that one arm, twisted at the torso in a way that would be uncomfortable for a human, but it seemed completely natural for this thing. I've been face to face with black bears 3 times in my life. I've had coyotes circle me in the dark. Hell, I even had a mountain lion stalk me once when I was hunting in Kentucky. But nothing has ever made me feel the way I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear exactly. That's what's so hard to explain. It was more like recognition, like some ancient part of my brain was saying, you know what this is, and you know what to do. And what I needed to do was leave, not run, not shout, not raise my weapon, just quietly withdraw. So that's what I did. I took a slow step backward, then another. I didn't turn my back to it. I just kept backing away, maintaining eye contact as best I could in the fading light. It didn't move to follow me, it just watched. When I'd put about 30 yards between us, I finally turned and walked at a normal pace back the way I'd come. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I didn't run. Somehow, I knew running would be the worst thing I could do. It wasn't until I was almost back to my truck, maybe half a mile away, that my brain started really processing what I'd seen. The proportions of the thing kept replaying in my mind. If it had stood up, it would have been at least 8 or 9 feet tall. Its arms were unusually long and looked powerful as hell. The back, like I said, was extremely wide, like a professional bodybuilder ×2, and it was covered in hair. Not fur exactly, but coarse, dark hair that seemed thicker around the shoulders and upper arms. I hadn't registered this detail consciously at first, but now it was clear in my memory. The hair wasn't uniform, it was patchy in places, thicker in others. The torso was longer than a human's would be, with the head positioned forward and slightly downward on the shoulders. What little I could make out of the face included that heavy brow and what seemed like a wide, low mouth. I sat in my truck for almost an hour before I felt calm enough to drive. I kept trying to convince myself that it was just a bear, but I've seen plenty of bears. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a suit. It wasn't anything I recognized, yet somehow it felt familiar in the most primal way. I've only told 3 people about this: my brother, my best friend, and my wife. My brother thinks I saw a bear in bad light. My friend believes me but thinks I should report it to someone. Who? My wife just looked at me with concern and asked if I was feeling okay. I haven't been back to that spot since. I've hunted other parts of the Scioto bottoms, but I can't bring myself to go near that bend in the trail. It's not that I'm afraid of being hurt. Like I said, I never felt threatened. It's more that I'm afraid of seeing it again and confirming that what I saw was real. Because if it was real, and deep down, I know it was, then everything I thought I knew about the world is wrong. There are things in these woods that shouldn't exist but do, things that have probably been there all along, watching us from the shadows while we blunder through their territory, oblivious. The weirdest part? Sometimes I feel like I was supposed to see it, like that moment was meant to happen. Not in some spiritual destiny way, but more like I was in the right place at the right time to witness something few people ever get to see. I've spent countless hours researching since then, looking up Bigfoot sightings in Ohio, reading about upright walking creatures, trying to find something that matches what I saw. There are similarities in some accounts, but nothing exactly like my experience. Some reports talk about aggressive behavior or strange sounds. Mine made no sound at all. Some describe creatures running away when spotted. This one just acknowledged me, assessed me, and somehow communicated without words that we had reached an understanding. The way it moved has stayed with me. That twist of its upper body was so fluid, so powerful. No human could move like that, and the size of it. Lying down, it took up almost the entire width of that small clearing. Standing, it would have been massive. I keep wondering what it was doing there. Was it drinking from the river, resting, hunting? Was it a surprise to see me as I was to see it? I've tried drawing what I saw, but I can't get it right. The proportions always look off on paper. Too human or not human enough. The face especially eludes me. It was too dark to see clearly, but I remember the impression of deep-set eyes under that heavy brow. This past summer, I drove out there in broad daylight. I parked at my usual spot and walked the trail to that bend in the river. Everything looked different in the daylight, smaller, more ordinary. I searched the area for any sign, footprints, hair caught on branches, anything, but found nothing conclusive. Just some unusual depressions in the soil near the riverbank that could have been made by anything. I've gone back and forth between telling myself it wasn't real and knowing deep in my gut that it was. The logical part of my brain wants to explain it away. Bad light, an odd-looking bear, my imagination filling in gaps. But then I remember the feeling that came over me in that moment, that instinctive knowing, and logic falls apart. One thing I'm certain of, I wasn't afraid for my safety, not even for a second. It wasn't giving off threatening vibes. If anything, it seemed annoyed, like I had interrupted its quiet time by the river, and now it had to deal with this human intruder. I wonder if it's still out there, still visiting that bend in the river when the light gets low. I wonder if it remembers me the way I remember it. I wonder how many other hunters have seen something similar and kept quiet because they didn't want to sound crazy. I've been in those woods hundreds of times over the years, and nothing like this ever happened before. Why that day? Why me? I don't have answers, just questions that keep me up at night sometimes. This happened almost a year ago now, and I still don't know what to make of it. I just know that when bow season starts again next month, I'll be setting up my stand in a completely different area. Some things you only need to see once in a lifetime. Story 16. I still get chills when I think about what happened last October. I've hunted for nearly 20 years and spent countless hours in the woods, but nothing prepared me for what I saw in Umpqua National Forest. I've been hesitant to share this, but I need to get it off my chest. It was October 28, 2017. The weather was perfect for elk hunting. Overcast, cool, with a light breeze. I'd taken a few days off work to hunt in a remote section of Umpqua I'd been to several times before. This area was about 4 miles from the nearest access road, which kept most casual hunters away. I'd seen good sign there in previous seasons. I was up before dawn, made a quick breakfast at camp, and hiked in under headlamp. By first light, I was settled in a spot overlooking a small meadow where I'd seen elk sign the previous evening. The forest was quiet except for the occasional chickadee or squirrel. No bugling, no movement in the brush, nothing. By mid-morning, I was getting restless. I'd seen 0 elk and barely any fresh sign. The area felt oddly empty, which should have been my first clue. Something was off. Even when you don't see elk, you usually hear something moving in the distance or see fresh droppings or tracks. But there was nothing. Around 11:30, I decided to change locations. I remembered a small creek about half a mile away that had a natural funnel where the terrain would push elk through if they were moving. I'd had success there 2 seasons ago. The creek was running clear and cold when I arrived. I found a fallen Douglas fir that made a perfect seat, about 10 yards back from the water, but with a good view upstream and downstream. I figured I'd eat lunch, then sit quietly for a couple hours to see if anything moved through. I pulled out my sandwich and thermos of coffee. The forest was so damn quiet. No wind in the trees, barely any birds, just the gentle gurgle of the creek. That silence should have bothered me more than it did. I was about halfway through my sandwich when I heard it. Splashing sounds coming from upstream, maybe 50 yards away. Not big splashes like an elk crossing, but deliberate, careful movements in the water. My first thought was maybe it was a bear fishing for salmon, though it was late in the run for that. I carefully set my sandwich down and picked up my rifle, not raising it but just having it ready. The sounds continued. Splash, pause, splash, pause. moving slowly downstream toward my position. Whatever it was seemed to be taking its time. At first, all I could see was what looked like a dark stump, or maybe a bear on all fours near the bank. The brush partially obscured my view, and the thing was still a good 40 yards upstream. I remember thinking it was odd how methodical the movement was. Bears tend to be more random when they're fishing. Then it stood up. I'm 6'1", and this thing was easily 1.5 feet taller than me, maybe 8 feet, and it just unfolded from what I'd thought was a crouched position. One second it's this dark shape near the creek, the next it's standing upright on 2 legs. My blood went cold. I froze completely. I couldn't have moved if my life depended on it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before, but I knew immediately what I was looking at. The creature had long, dark, reddish-brown hair covering its entire body. The hair hung from its shoulders almost to its hips, and I could see small twigs and bits of forest debris tangled in its thick coat. Not fur like a bear, more like hair, but shaggier and coarser. Its arms were proportionally longer than a human's, hanging down almost to its knees. The shoulders were incredibly broad, easily twice the width of mine, with a massive chest that tapered down to a more narrow waist and powerful-looking legs. I was downwind, thank God, and the creature seemed unaware of my presence. It stepped fully into the creek without making much splash, despite its size. The way it moved was so deliberate, it would bend down, turn over stones in the creek bed, then examine whatever was underneath. It was clearly looking for food, maybe crayfish or small fish. I remember noticing how its hands worked, not like bear paws, but more like oversized human hands with opposable thumbs. It used its fingers with surprising dexterity to flip rocks and pick up whatever it found. At one point it stood up straight again and lifted its head, sniffing the air. It was facing away from me, and I could see the massive breadth of its back, the way the muscles moved under the hair. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain it would hear it. Then it turned slightly, and I caught a glimpse of its profile. The face was, I don't know how to describe it exactly. Not quite human, not quite ape. The brow ridge was prominent, the nose flat and wide, but the eyes seemed deeply set and alert. I couldn't make out much detail from that distance, but what struck me was how aware it looked. This wasn't just an animal operating on instinct. There was intelligence there. I was completely still, barely breathing. My rifle was across my lap, but the thought of raising it never even crossed my mind. I wasn't afraid it would attack. I was afraid of disturbing this moment, of startling this creature that shouldn't exist, but was standing 30 yards away from me. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, it seemed to lose interest in the creek. It moved toward the bank, and I was amazed at how quietly something so large could move. It made less noise than I would crossing the same terrain. It stepped out of the water onto the muddy bank, and I noticed how it placed its feet carefully, deliberately. It moved with a fluid motion that seemed almost casual, but covered ground quickly, despite what looked like a relatively slow gait. It reached a cluster of alder trees about 20 yards from the creek, then stopped again. It stood motionless, just listening. I swear it tilted its head slightly, the way a person does when they're trying to identify a sound. Then, without any apparent hurry, it stepped behind the trees and disappeared into the thicker forest beyond. I didn't move for at least 15 minutes after it was gone. I kept expecting it to return, to catch my scent, to come investigate. But there was nothing, just the quiet forest and the bubbling creek. When I finally felt safe enough to move, my legs were shaking so badly I almost fell when I stood up. I left my half-eaten lunch where it was and moved cautiously to the creek bank where the creature had been. The footprints in the soft mud were unmistakable. Each one was nearly twice the length of my size 11 boot with clear toe impressions. The stride length was enormous, and the depth of the prints showed just how heavy this thing was. What really got me was how fresh they were. The water was still seeping into the depressions. I followed the tracks to the tree line, but didn't go further. The brush got thick quickly, and the terrain sloped steeply upward. Besides, I wasn't about to track this thing into dense cover. I'm not that stupid or that brave. I took a few deep breaths, trying to process what I'd just seen. I'd always been skeptical of Sasquatch stories. I'd heard other hunters talk about strange experiences, found unexplained footprints, heard weird calls at night. But I'd always written it off as misidentifications or overactive imaginations. Not anymore. The walk back to camp was the longest of my life. Every sound, every movement in the brush made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain I was being watched. When I finally reached camp, I packed up immediately. I couldn't imagine spending another night out there. The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it, trying to convince myself it had been a bear, or maybe even another hunter in some kind of ghillie suit. But I knew better. The proportions were wrong for a bear, the movement too fluid, too intentional, and no human could move like that or leave tracks that size. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I could hear something moving outside my window. I became obsessed with Sasquatch research, reading everything I could find, comparing accounts to what I'd seen. So many details matched. The proportions, the movement patterns, the behavior. I considered reporting it to one of those Bigfoot research groups, but ultimately decided against it. I didn't want the attention, didn't want people traipsing through my hunting area, didn't want to be labeled as the crazy guy who saw Bigfoot. The strangest part? I've gone back to that same area every fall since then. I tell myself it's because it's good elk country, but that's not the real reason. I go back hoping to see it again, to confirm I didn't imagine the whole thing. I've never seen another Sasquatch there, but twice I've heard splashing in that same creek when nothing was visible, and once I found a line of tracks crossing a muddy game trail after a rainstorm. The same massive footprints I saw that day. What I saw has fundamentally changed how I view the wilderness. The forests feel different now, more mysterious, more alive. I pay attention to different things. Unusual silences, strange movements in the trees, unexpected behavior from wildlife. I know how this sounds. If someone had told me this story 5 years ago, I would have nodded politely while thinking they were full of shit. I get it, but I know what I saw. I know what was standing in that creek, turning over stones with its massive hands, moving through the forest like it owned it. It was real. It was there. And the most unsettling thing is that it probably still is, moving silently through remote corners of the forest where people rarely go, watching us while remaining unseen. Story 17. I've been going back and forth about whether to share this experience for months now. I spent 17 years as a deputy sheriff in Wyoming, and I've always prided myself on being level-headed and rational. What happened to me last summer has completely shaken that foundation. I'm not looking for anyone to believe me. Honestly, I'm still trying to process it myself. I retired from law enforcement about 3 years ago, but still live near Cody, Wyoming. I've spent most of my life outdoors, hunting, fishing, hiking, you name it. I know the wilderness around here better than most, which is why what happened is so disturbing to me. I can't explain it, but I know what I saw. It was mid-July last year, probably around the 11th or 12th. The weather had been perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-70s. I decided to take my truck out to some old logging roads south of Upper Sunshine Reservoir, an area I've visited dozens of times over the years. It's pretty remote, and I hadn't been out there since before the pandemic. I wanted to check out a couple of the mountain lakes and just enjoy some solitude. I parked my truck at the end of this old logging road around 9 in the morning. The area is beautiful. Tall pines, aspens, rocky outcroppings, and these little meadows scattered throughout. I had my day pack with water, some trail mix, my digital camera, and of course my sidearm. Old habits die hard, and I never go into remote areas unarmed. I hiked about 3 miles to the first lake, taking my time, just enjoying being out there. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I saw some deer tracks, a couple of hawks circling overhead, normal stuff. I spent maybe an hour at the first lake, then decided to push on to the second one, which is smaller but deeper and nestled in this little valley. It was around 1 in the afternoon when I reached the second lake. I found a nice spot on a fallen log, ate a quick lunch, and just sat there taking in the scenery. That's when things started to feel different. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but suddenly I had this feeling like I was being watched. Any law enforcement officer develops this sense over time. It's like a sixth sense that saved my life more than once. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself scanning the tree line. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I heard it, this weird two-toned howl coming from the trees to my right. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote. It wasn't an elk bugle. It was something I'd never heard before, lower pitched at first, then rising to almost a wailing sound before dropping again. It echoed across the lake and I immediately stood up. I can't emphasize enough how strange this sound was. It felt intelligent, if that makes any sense, like it had purpose behind it. I'm not someone who gets spooked easily, but something about that sound made my stomach drop. I decided it was probably time to start heading back. I packed up my stuff and was just about to start walking when I spotted something moving behind a large pine tree about 150 yards away on the other side of a small clearing. At first I thought it might be a bear. We have plenty of grizzlies and black bears in this area. But then I saw a hand, a massive hand with what looked like dark reddish-brown fur, grip the side of the tree trunk. Not a paw, a hand. I froze completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Slowly, I could make out more of the figure as it shifted position behind the tree. It was trying to hide, but it was simply too big to be completely concealed. Based on where its hand was positioned on the tree trunk, this thing had to be at least 7 feet tall. The fur was this dark, reddish-brown color, thicker around the shoulders. I could just make out part of its face, deeply set eyes under a prominent brow ridge. It was watching me intently. I've spent my entire adult life in law enforcement and the outdoors. I know what bears look like. I know what moose look like. This was neither. This was something else entirely. My first instinct was to document it. I slowly reached for my camera, trying not to make any sudden movements. The moment I did, the creature stepped partially out from behind the tree. It turned slightly, and I got a better look at its build. The shoulders on this thing were massive, easily twice the width of a large man. Its arms hung longer than a human's would, and its head seemed to sit directly on those shoulders with almost no visible neck. That's when I saw the second one. About 20 yards behind the first creature, a second figure emerged from behind another tree. This one was slightly shorter and darker in color, almost black. It moved with the same deliberate caution as the first, staying partially hidden, but clearly visible enough for me to make out its shape. I'm not ashamed to admit that at this point, I was terrified. I'm 6 feet tall and weigh around 200 pounds, and I felt absolutely small compared to these things. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't even operate my camera properly. I fumbled with it for a few seconds before giving up and slowly backing away. As I began to retreat, both creatures started moving too, not directly toward me, but parallel to my path, keeping to the trees. They were shadowing me. There's no other way to describe it. They weren't charging or being aggressive, but they were definitely tracking my movements. I maintained what I thought was a safe distance and kept walking back toward my truck, trying to keep them in my peripheral vision without making direct eye contact. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I knew that might trigger a predatory response. So I kept a steady pace, my hand on my sidearm, though I had no intention of using it unless absolutely necessary. The whole time, I could hear them moving through the underbrush, breaking branches, rustling leaves. They weren't trying to be stealthy anymore. It was like they wanted me to know they were there, following me. After about 20 minutes of this terrifying escort, I could see the clearing where I'd parked my truck. I thought I was in the clear. That's when I heard it. This deep, guttural bark-like yell from behind me. It wasn't like the howl I'd heard earlier. This was aggressive, almost like a warning. I turned to look, and that's when the first rock hit a tree about 5 feet to my right. Then another rock landed about 10 feet in front of me. These weren't pebbles. These were rocks the size of baseballs and softballs, and they were being thrown with force. I don't care what anyone says. These weren't rocks falling or rolling down a hill. They were being thrown deliberately in my direction. Not directly at me, but close enough to send a clear message. Get out. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran the last 100 yards to my truck, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I started the engine and began to back up to turn around, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the tree line, about 60 yards away. Both creatures were standing there, partially obscured by the trees, but clearly visible enough for me to see their silhouettes. They were just watching, not advancing, not retreating, just observing as I prepared to leave. I gunned the engine and got out of there as fast as I could on that rough logging road. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, and even then, I kept checking my rearview mirror like I expected to see them following me somehow. It's been almost 11 months since that day, and I still haven't been back to that area. I've told exactly 3 people about what happened: my wife, my brother, and one close friend who's an avid outdoorsman. My wife believes me because she knows I'm not the type to make up stories. My brother thinks I saw bears, and my mind played tricks on me. My friend is the one who suggested these might have been Sasquatch. I've spent countless hours researching Bigfoot sightings since then, and some of the descriptions match exactly what I saw. The height, the build, the reddish fur, the rock throwing. What disturbs me most is how intelligent they seemed. They coordinated with each other. They deliberately herded me away from their territory. I've been in the Wyoming wilderness my entire life and never seen anything like this before or since. I don't know what to make of it. I don't have a history of mental health issues. I wasn't drinking or taking any medications. The weather was clear. I know what I saw. I'm still struggling with whether I should report this officially somewhere. As a former law enforcement officer, I value credibility above almost everything else, and I know how this story sounds, but I also know what I experienced that day was real. I guess I'm sharing this now because I need to process it somehow. I need to put it into words to make sense of it. Those creatures were real, they were intelligent, and they wanted me gone from their territory. I haven't told anyone exactly where this happened, and I don't plan to. Whatever those creatures were, they deserve to be left alone. But I know one thing for certain: I'll never look at the forests around Cody the same way again, and I'll never again dismiss someone's story about seeing something unexplainable in the wilderness. Because now I've seen it too.